household as the center of identity and purpose. For millennia, the journey homeward has captivated our collective imagination, reflecting our deepest longings and struggles against forces that threaten to leave us adrift. When Odysseus set sail from the smoking ruins of Troy, his expected return of weeks stretched into a decade of Nosto's homecoming consumed by divine opposition, monstrous encounters, temptation, and profound personal transformation. Why does his narrative, the Odyssey, retain such powerful resonance 3 millennia after its composition? It is, perhaps, because we recognize in Odysseus a mirror of the self, the individual yearning for stability while simultaneously driven by the impulse for adventure, the struggle between duty and desire, the necessity of confronting both external cosmic obstacles and internal moral failings. On the path toward self-actualization, even in our contemporary world, echoes of Odysseus persist in the soldier returning from conflict, fundamentally altered by witnessed trauma, in the refugee navigating perilous waters in pursuit of safety, in the individual seeking to rediscover authentic selfhood after a period of estrangement. The hero's journey, at its core, is a trajectory of existential metamorphosis. We depart as one person and return irrevocably shaped by experience. This epic is not merely an ancient adventure story. It is a topography of human experience, historical context, and the lost Bronze Age. To truly appreciate this timeless narrative, we must first situate it within the world that catalyzed its creation, world already relegated to ancient history by the time of its composition. The events described are set around 1200 BCE, during the waning years of the Late Bronze Age. This was a highly sophisticated era characterized by palace economies, extensive maritime trade networks, bureaucratic administration via writing systems, and a complex international balance of power among Aegean city-states and great empires. Yet, this sophisticated system was on the verge of catastrophic collapse. Between 1200 and 1150 BCE, civilization across the eastern Mediterranean experienced a dramatic systemic breakdown. Major urban centers were destroyed, empires vanished, literacy rates plummeted, and trade routes disintegrated. The precise etiology of this collapse remains a subject of intense scholarly debate: climate change, widespread drought, seismic activity, internal peasant revolts, or the incursions of the enigmatic sea peoples are all hypothesized. The result, however, was unequivocal. A complex international order was succeeded by centuries of fragmentation and decline, which scholars term the Greek Dark Age. It was during this Dark Age that the core narratives of the Trojan War and its aftermath were preserved and transmitted through oral tradition. When these tales were finally committed to writing, most likely in the 8th century BC, they captured a filtered cultural memory of that lost Bronze Age golden era. This gives the Odyssey a fascinating double perspective. Its setting is the world of Mycenaean kings and heroes, but its composition reflects the nascent world of emerging city-states, Peleus, renewed literacy, and wide-ranging colonization. Archaeological investigation has long sought to delineate the historical substrate beneath. Homer's epic, Heinrich Schliemann's discovery of Troy in the 1870s confirmed the city's existence. Subsequent excavations at Mycenae, Pylos, and Ithaca have revealed fortified palace complexes consistent with the poem's descriptions. Nevertheless, the Odyssey is fundamentally not history. It is something more profound, a fusion of myth and reality, blending the divine with the human, rendering cultural memory into enduring art. The enigma of the poet and formulaic composition. Sing to me, O Muse, of the man of many devices. These words inaugurate one of humanity's greatest literary achievements. Yet, the identity of the poet who composed them remains literature's most enduring mystery. Was Homer a singular poetic genius, a composite name for a succession of bards, or perhaps a figure drawn from the Ionian tradition of the blind poet? We cannot definitively know. Ancient sources typically situate him in Ionia, western Anatolia, with 7 cities vying for the honor of being his birthplace. Whatever the truth of his identity, Homer represents the apex of a sophisticated oral, poetic tradition, a system that enabled the composition and transmission of epics of astonishing complexity without reliance on writing. This was made possible by what scholars term formulaic composition. The poets, known as oiodoi singers, did not memorize fixed texts, but mastered a vast repertoire of metrical phrases. Epithets like windark sea, gride Athena, recurring type scenes, for example, feasting, sacrifice, arming, and established story patterns. These oiodoi were, in effect, the living libraries of their culture, recreating the narrative with each performance while preserving its essential structure and thematic core. Sometime around the 8th century BCE, the revolutionary technology of alphabetic writing made it possible to fix these oral epics permanently in written form. The text we study today bears the indelible imprint of its oral genesis, the consistent rhythm of the dactylic hexameter, the recurring formulas, and the narrative techniques designed to aid memory and performance, all integrated by a unifying artistic vision, narrative, architecture in medias res and ring composition. Odyssey's artistic mastery extends beyond its language to its ingenious structure, which utilizes sophisticated narrative techniques that remain influential today. Most notable is the decision to begin in medias res, in the middle of things, rather than commencing with Odysseus's departure from Troy. The epic opens in his 7th year of captivity on Calypso's island. His preceding decade of harrowing adventures, the Cyclops, Circe, Scylla, and Charybdis, is recounted later, through Odysseus's own retrospective narration to the Phaeacians. This creates a complex temporal structure. The poem's 24 books primarily cover only approximately equals 40 days of present time, but encompass a decade of wandering through interwoven flashbacks. This architectural complexity feels remarkably modern. The narrative also employs ring composition, a structural device where themes and motifs introduced early in a sequence are restated or resolved in reverse order, creating a symmetrical pattern. Examples include the divine assemblies at the beginning and end, and the parallel journey of Telemachus that mirrors his father's Nostos. These patterns are not merely decorative. They establish meaningful thematic contrasts and parallels that deepen the poem's ethical and political arguments. When contrasted with its companion piece, the Iliad, the Odyssey reveals a striking shift in values. The Iliad is a poem of wrath, glory, and noble death in the narrow context of a siege. The Odyssey is a poem of survival, cunning, and living wisely. It rewards not martial conquest, but the conquest of self, embodying a new heroic ideal centered on intellect. The protagonist, a new heroic ideal. At the core of the narrative stands Odysseus, a hero defined by intellect over brute force. His very name is etymologically suggestive of both suffering and cunning, possibly derived from a verb meaning to hate or to be wrathful against, with overtones of deception. Homer reinforces this identity through his defining epithets. He is Polytropos, man of many turns, ways; Polmetis, of many devices, much cunning; and Polyalos, of various wiles. This emphasis on intelligence and adaptability reflects a shift in post-Trojan War heroic values. The world now rewards the individual capable of navigating complex social and supernatural threats while preserving identity and relationships. Odysseus is the hero of uncertain times, yet his defining strength also precipitates his most tragic flaw. His cleverness breeds hubris. Most famously, in the Cyclops episode, his inability to resist revealing his true name to the blinded Polyphemus triggers Poseidon's implacable wrath. Condemning his crew to years of suffering, Odysseus's compelling complexity makes him the first truly psychological hero in Western literature. He embodies profound duality: the faithful husband who rejects immortality for his home, yet the wanderer who dallies with goddesses; the master storyteller, yet the master liar who must deceive friend and foe alike. His journey is thus not merely across dangerous seas, but through the treacherous waters of his own nature. The crisis at Ithaca. Disorder in the Oikos while Odysseus struggles to return. His kingdom of Ithaca faces an internal crisis threatening the very social fabric of the realm. The palace, once the seat of legitimate authority, has become a microcosm of escalating disorder. For years, approximately equals 108 young nobles, the suits, have occupied Odysseus's palace. Their behavior, the daily, lavish feasting financed by slaughtering the absent king's livestock, the abuse of servants, and the plot to murder Telemachus reveals them as parasites who embody the violation of Xenia's sacred guest friendship, the foundational custom of the Homeric world. This situation signifies a profound political and social breakdown. In Odysseus's absence, legitimate authority dissolves. Telemachus is too inexperienced to assert control, and Penelope's ambiguous marital status leaves the succession vulnerable. The crisis raises fundamental questions about the fragility of customs and laws when traditional structures of justice fail. The suitor's actions represent a massive and unsustainable economic drain on the royal household's wealth. At the heart of this disruption stands Penelope, forced to maintain a precarious balance between resistance and accommodation. Lacking male protection, she navigates an impossible situation through strategic delays and intelligence. Most famously, her shroud-weaving deception, demonstrating a capacity for cunning equal to her husband's. The crisis necessitates a painful coming of age. Raised without a father, he struggles for voice and agency. His eventual journey to seek news of Odysseus the Telemachi is as much about discovering his own identity as it is about finding his father. Divine framework, agency, fate, and justice. No understanding of the epic is complete without recognizing its divine dimension. The gods are not distant figures. They are active participants in human affairs, shaping the action through a celestial mirror that reflects human society's own politics and conflicts. Odysseus's fate is governed by the two opposing forces of Athena's steadfast support and Poseidon's implacable hatred. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, metis, and strategic warfare, recognizes a kindred spirit in Odysseus. Her aid is primarily manifest in providing guidance and opportune intervention, thus helping those who help themselves. Poseidon's enmity stems from Odysseus's blinding of his son, the Cyclops, As the god of untamable forces, Poseidon embodies the chaos and danger that threaten human order. creating the central tension of the hero's sea voyage. The Homeric world operates according to clear spiritual principles. The gods expect proper worship and xenia, and they punish transgression. Yet, the relationship between fate, Moira, and divine will remains critically ambiguous. Zeus himself acknowledges that humans often suffer beyond their destined portion due to their own folly, not solely a divine plan. This tension between fate, divine will, and human agency creates the moral universe of the poem, where meaningful choices are made within cosmic constraints. Part 2. The hero emerges. The son's quest. Telemachus, searching for a father. The Odyssey deliberately begins, not with Odysseus, but with his son Telemachus, a young man struggling on the verge of adulthood. For most of his 20 years, he has lived a passive half-life in a palace under siege. Divine intervention, initiated by Athena disguised as Mentes, sparks his transition. She plants the seeds of independent action, urging him, "You must not cling to your boyhood any longer. You are no longer a child." This divine nudge propels him to his first political act, calling an assembly of the Ithacan elders. Despite the suitor's mockery, Telemachus persists, securing a ship again. With Athena's aid, this time disguised as Mentor, and setting sail under cover of night. His journey is one of education and self-discovery. He first travels to Pylos, the kingdom of the aged Nestor, who embodies living memory and proper xenia. Nestor tells Telemachus tales of his father's strategic brilliance during the war, confirming the image of a hero worth finding. From Pylos, Telemachus' journeys to Sparta to meet Menelaus and Helen. Here, he is received with exemplary hospitality, witnessing a functional royal household. Menelaus shares the vital intelligence gained from the sea god Proteus. Odysseus is alive but captive on the island of the nymph Calypso. For the first time, Telemachus has confirmation of his father's survival, gaining renewed purpose. More importantly, through his travels, Telemachus gains the perspective and confidence necessary for kingship. He learns discretion, diplomatic tact, and strategic thinking, stepping out of the feminized space of his father's palace to engage with the world of heroic men. His education is complete when the suitors, recognizing his newfound independence, escalate the crisis by plotting his murder at sea. Penelope, the strategy of delay while Telemachus sails. Penelope remains at the palace, navigating her own treacherous social waters, a case study in the constrained agency of women in the ancient world. Without confirmation of Odysseus' death, she is neither wife nor widow, leaving her vulnerable to the suitors and societal pressure to remarry. Her response is a masterclass in strategic resistance. Where Odysseus employs tactical deception on his journey, Penelope utilizes strategic delay at home. Her most famous tactic is the Shroud of Laertes, promising to choose a new husband only after completing a funeral shroud for her father. She diligently weaves by day and secretly unravels her progress each night for 3 years. This act both fulfills and subverts feminine expectations, simultaneously appearing the model of wifely industry, while covertly resisting the very social pressure her weaving seemingly acknowledges. Penelope's intelligence manifests in careful management of the suitors, placating them with appearances while never yielding the substance of her resistance. Her grief and isolation function as a form of loyalty, maintaining Odysseus' presence and keeping the space for return open. Her steadfastness has elevated her to the archetype of marital fidelity, but the poem suggests a more nuanced, active fidelity, loyalty, not only to her husband, but to her own authority and judgment. the household oikos and social breakdown beyond the immediate family. The crisis at Ithaca represents the disintegration of the entire household, oikos, the fundamental social and economic unit of ancient Greek life. The royal household, which normally functioned as a center of economic and social order through patronage and resource redistribution, has been perverted by the suitors. The suitors consume without reciprocating, violating the social contract by acting as parasites. Their prolonged occupation depletes the household's wealth at an unsustainable rate, threatening not just present consumption but future production. The palace's physical spaces reflect this social disorder. Public areas are appropriated, storerooms are depleted, and boundaries are erased. Among the servants, the household's fragmentation is clear. Some, like the swineherd, Eumaeus, and the nurse Euryclea, maintain steadfast loyalty. Others shift allegiance to the new center of power. This social infection highlights why the eventual restoration requires not just the death of the suitors, but a literal cleansing and reestablishment of physical and social boundaries. Within the home, most poignant is the case of Argos, Odysseus's dog, who recognizes his disguised master immediately and dies shortly after, having maintained loyalty even when order and care had been withdrawn. The crisis in Ithaca operates on multiple, layered levels: personal, familial, economic, political, and moral, giving Odysseus's eventual return its full significance as the restoration of a fractured cosmos. Part 2. The hero emerges escape and survival captivity. With Calypso only now does Homer introduce Odysseus himself, finding him in a state of profound suspension on the island of Ogygia, captive to the nymph goddess Calypso. For 7 years, Odysseus has endured this beautiful prison. Ogygia represents a material paradise offering immortality and ageless life if he remains her consort. Yet we find him sitting on the shore, weeping for home. Day after day, he returns to this spot, his tears undiminished. This powerful image, the mortal who rejects immortality because it would necessitate surrendering his identity, reveals the core of his character. Ogygia offers physical comfort, but denies him his social self. The web of human relationships, oikos and polis, that give his life meaning. Calypso's paradise has become his purgatory. The agony of homecoming, from divine captivity to cosmic rage, the Calypso episode. Temptation and identity when Hermes arrives with Zeus's Crurogma command to release Odysseus. Calypso's bitter response highlights the gendered double standards of Olympus. She correctly observes the hypocrisy of male gods, routinely pursuing mortal women while condemning a goddess's love for a mortal man. Her complaint functions as Homer's subtle critique of the prevailing patriarchal power structures within the cosmic hierarchy. Despite her reluctance, Calypso aids Odysseus in constructing his raft, providing tools, provisions, and sailing directions. Her final gift, clothing that retains warmth, underscores the tension central to this episode. Temptation versus homecoming. Odysseus repeatedly faces the choice between extraordinary pleasure and immortal comfort as offered by Calypso, versus the arduous struggle for a limited, mortal identity centered on Ithaca and Penelope, Odysseus's epithet. Polytropos, man of many turns, defines his capacity for adaptation. Yet he consistently rejects transformation into something permanent or divine. His flexibility of mind exists in dynamic tension with his unwavering commitment to his specific human oikos. Calypso, left behind, is an immortal forced to confront the dignity and urgency defined by human transience. the storm and the will to survive. 17 days into his voyage, disaster strikes. Poseidon, returning from the Ethiopians, spots Odysseus and unleashes a storm of literally divine proportions. This sequence is a visceral depiction of cosmic rage and elemental chaos. For ancient maritime cultures, the sea embodied the terrifying power of natural forces constantly threatening the fragile order of human enterprise. Odysseus's response demonstrates his hard-earned wisdom. He recognizes the futility of fighting Poseidon's domain on the god's own terms. Stripping off Calypso's weighty clothes, he rides a single plank. The sea goddess Leucothea offers her magical veil, exemplifying the recurring motif that divine assistance follows maximal human effort. For 2 days and nights, Odysseus struggles, reduced to his essential qualities: physical endurance, mental resilience, and the will to survive. He is the bare hero fighting against oblivion. His eventual crawl onto the Phaeacian shore marks a transition from the chaotic, fluid realm of Poseidon to the solid, ordered world of human society, symbolic death and rebirth, collapsing beneath 2 intertwined olive trees, one wild, one cultivated. He rests in a space poised between nature and civilization. The Phaeacian interlude, reintegration into society. The Phaeacian interlude is essential for the hero's reintegration. After years of isolation, Odysseus must relearn the social tech skill of human interaction. This process begins with the charming encounter with Princess Nausicaa, daughter of King Alcinous and Queen Narrator. Awakened by the girl's shouts, Odysseus emerges, a disheveled, salt-encrusted figure. His approach to Nausicaa, however, showcases his diplomatic genius. He keeps his distance and delivers a speech of exquisite tact, comparing her to the goddess Artemis and appealing to her sense of hospitality. He transforms himself from threatening stranger to worthy supplicant through the power of language alone. Nausicaa responds with exemplary xenia, offering clothing, food, and safe direction to the palace. The Phaeacian court embodies the pinnacle of civilized existence, gleaming with blessed with perpetually fruiting orchards and possessing magically swift ships. They respond to Odysseus with a model hospitality, offering succor before demanding identity. After athletic games, where Odysseus proves his prowess by easily winning the discus throw, foreshadowing his eventual triumph over the suitors, the pivotal moment arrives. The court bard Demodocus sings of the Trojan War, specifically the Trojan Horse strategy Odysseus devised. Hearing the tale of his own former glory, Odysseus weeps behind his cloak, moved by memories of his lost men. King Alcinous notices his distress and gently asks the key question that transitions the epic from third-person to first-person narrative. Who are you? Tell us your name. This moment of revelation carries immense weight. Odysseus publicly reclaims his identity and begins the narrative of his Wanderings of Frame story that will occupy the next 4 books. The Phaeacians, an idealized society untouched by war, serve as a transitional space where Odysseus can process his extraordinary experiences before confronting the flawed, complex humanity of Ithaca. Part 3. The War. After the war, Odysseus flashbacks the art of storytelling, seated among the attentive Odysseus begins his self-naming. I am Odysseus, son of Laertes ... Double quote, this declaration, which almost proved fatal with the Cyclops, is now an act of courage and narrative agency. He proves himself as masterful a storyteller as he is a strategist, crafting a narrative that privileges the emotional and experiential, truth over mere chronology. Odysseus's adventures function as a structured series of moral and psychological trials. The Chacones, a brief military raid that fails due to the crew's greed and lack of discipline. 6 men are lost per ship, establishing the pattern of the crew's fatal insubordination. The Lotus Eaters. They offer no violence but a more insidious danger, the temptation to surrender purpose and memory for a pleasant narcotic stasis. Odysseus physically drags his men back, asserting the priority of remembering over forgetting. The Cyclops, Polyphemus. This is a contest between civilized Metis, cunning, and pre-civilized brute force. Odysseus triumphs by weaponizing language itself. Nobody is killing me. However, his subsequent act of hubris, shouting his true name, triggers Poseidon's wrath, transforming a tactical victory into a strategic catastrophe that costs him a decade of wandering. Keeper of the winds. Odysseus is given the means for a swift return, only to be betrayed by his suspicious and greedy men who open the bag of contrary winds while he sleeps. This reinforces the fatal dynamic of secrecy and mistrust between leader and crew. The Lastrygonians, a race of giant cannibals who annihilates the fleet. The brutal, swift destruction of 11 ships leaves Odysseus with a single vessel, marking the darkest point of his journey. The enchantress Odysseus lands on Ithaca, home to Circe, who transforms his men into swine. Aided by Hermes' moly magic herb, Odysseus resists her spells and compels her to restore his crew. Their year-long stay represents the temptation of luxurious stasis. Circe eventually directs him to the next essential challenge, the descent to the underworld Catabasis. The underworld Nicaea, sailing to the western edge of the world. Odysseus performs rituals to consult the dead. The blind prophet Tiresias delivers the crucial prophecy, warning of the danger of Helios's sacred cattle and foretelling Odysseus's eventual return and final journey inland. Encounters with his mother, Anticlea, who died of grief, and the shade of Agamemnon, who warns him against trusting his wife, serve as emotional and political warnings. Achilles' famous declaration, "I would rather be a hired laborer on earth, than rule over all the dead," underscores the epic's embrace of mortal life over transcendent glory. The final trials, knowledge, loss, and transgression. Returning to Circe, Odysseus receives detailed knowledge of the final dangers. The Sirens. Odysseus plugs his men's ears, but has himself bound to the mast. He experiences their enchanting song, which tempts him not with pleasure, but with forbidden knowledge without being able to act on their fatal allure. Achieving a balance between experience and restraint. Scylla and Charybdis. Odysseus must make an agonizing choice between 2 forms of loss, choosing to pass by Scylla, the 6-headed monster, and sacrificing 6 men rather than risking the loss of the entire ship in the deadly whirlpool Charybdis. He must witness his companions' deaths, embodying the ultimate burden of leadership. The cattle of Helios on Thrinacia. Despite explicit warnings, the crew is trapped by unfavorable winds. While Odysseus prays, the desperate, starving crew, persuaded by Eurylochus, slaughters the sacred cattle, committing a fatal transgression against cosmic order. This act, justified by a desperate rationalization, is immediately signaled by uncanny omens. The meat lows on the spit. Zeus fulfills his promise to the outraged. Helios, a devastating storm, destroys the ship, killing every man save Odysseus, who lashes together a makeshift raft. Carried back past Scylla and Charybdis, he barely survives before drifting to Calypso's island, completing the circle of his narrative. As Odysseus concludes his tale, the Phaeacian audience is silent. The extended first-person narrative has allowed Odysseus to reclaim and shape his own identity through storytelling, bridging his past glory and his present circumstances. He is now ready to transition from a celebrated guest to a king determined to wrest justice to his domain. Part 4. Homecoming. The king, in disguised disorientation and strategic concealment. Tas the Phaeacians' miraculous ship delivers the sleeping Odysseus to Ithaca. His awakening is marked not by immediate triumph, but by profound disorientation. Surrounded by morning mist, he fails to recognize the homeland for which he endured a 2-decade nostos. This confusion captures a critical psychological truth. The reconciliation of the imagined home with the confronting reality is often the final challenge of the returned traveler. Athena appears, initially disguised, then revealing herself to her favorite mortal. Their exchange is characterized by divine patronage and mutual respect. She commends his reflexive deception, his fabricated identity, while he submits to her strategic plan. She transforms him into an aged beggar, stooping his posture, wrinkling his skin, and clothing him in rags. This disguise is multifunctional: protection from the homicidal suitors, strategic concealment to test loyalties, and a symbolic representation of his liminal status, physically present, yet socially absent from his true identity. Athena departs to fetch Telemachus from Sparta, setting up the parallel and synchronized return of father and son, a hallmark of the epic's carefully constructed later books. Testing loyalties, the swineherds, fidelity following Athena's guidance. The disguised Odysseus seeks out the humble hut of his swineherd. This location, far from the palace's corrupted splendor, becomes the staging ground for restoration. Eumaeus exemplifies unwavering loyalty. He welcomes the ragged stranger with dignity and boundless xenia, sharing what his modest means allow. This warm reception starkly contrasts with the abuse Odysseus will receive from the highborn suitors, underscoring one of the epic's central ethical arguments. True nobility resides in behavior and ethics, not in birthright or wealth. Eumaeus, the slave, embodies the ethical code the free nobles violate. Over fabricated stories, Odysseus creating an elaborate Cretan falsity. Odysseus gathers crucial intelligence about the economic and political decay of his kingdom, all while Eumaeus shares his own story of being a kidnapped prince now living as a slave. A poignant counterpoint, in which a nobleman disguised as a beggar converses with a prince living as a slave. The revelation, father and son. Tranquility of the hut is broken by the arrival of Telemachus, who, forewarned of the suitor's ambush, has matured and now acts with caution. When Eumaeus departs to inform Penelope of her son's safe return, Athena appears and temporarily restores Odysseus's true, regal form. Telemachus's initial reaction is one of resistance and doubt. Fearing a divine trick, "You cannot be my father, Odysseus. Some god is deceiving me." Double quotes. This resistance highlights the psychological toll of years of false hope. Their eventual embrace, compared by Homer to the keening of eagles whose nestlings have been stolen, emphasizes the primal, overwhelming nature of their reunion. Emotion quickly yields to conspiracy. Father and son immediately begin plotting the suitor's destruction, establishing a working partnership based on complementary skills. The resumption of the beggar disguise before Eumaeus's return underscores the necessity of strategic deception in their meticulous plan. unmasking and humiliation. Journey from the swineherd's hut to the palace provides key recognition scenes and necessary humiliation. The old dog, Argos, neglected and lying on a dung heap, offers uncomplicated recognition, wagging his tail before dying, a symbol of the household's decay and the power of love to pierce disguise where reason fails. Upon entering his own hall, Odysseus faces his greatest humiliation. The goatherd, Melanius, a traitorous servant, subjects him to contempt and physical abuse. Inside, the suitors, led by Antinous, treat him with calculated cruelty, Antinous hurling a footstool at him. This brutal act is the moral crystallization of the suitor's corruption, providing the final, necessary justification for the extreme violence to come. The final test and partial recognition despite the abuse. Odysseus's extraordinary self-control maintains his disguise. He is summoned by Penelope, creating a scene of high dramatic irony as the wife questions her own husband. Odysseus fabricates another convincing tale, yet the psychological barriers to recognition remain. Penelope, wise and cautious, demands a sign known only to them. The stage is set for the climax when Penelope announces the contest of the bow. Whoever can string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads will win her hand. This challenge, impossible for any man but Odysseus, becomes the mechanism for the reckoning. One final, tense recognition occurs when the aged nurse Euryclea bathes the disguised hero and recognizes a distinctive scar on his thigh. This partial recognition, achieved by those with the least social power, the dog, the nurse, the swineherd, illustrates the theme that genuine loyalty perceives truth most clearly, making them essential allies. Part 5. The reckoning. Justice comes with arrows. Contest and the turning point. Dawn breaks on the day of the contest. The bow, a symbolic representation of Odysseus's warrior and hunter identity, defeats all the young suitors who cannot even string it. Arrogance meets inadequacy. At the critical moment, the beggar approaches and asks for a turn. With masterful ease and practiced expertise, Homer compares his touch to a musician tuning a lyre. Odysseus strings the bow. The sound of the tightening string resonates through the hall, followed by the extraordinary feat of shooting an arrow cleanly through all 12 axe handles. The hall falls into stunned silence. Odysseus casts off his rags, stands tall in the threshold, a symbolically charged position between worlds, and announces himself. The contest is ended. Now, for another target that no man has yet hit. With that, he looses an arrow directly into Antinous' throat as the suitor lifts a wine cup. The graphic detail of the feast becoming bloodied establishes the shocking, irreversible transition from revelry to slaughter. The slaughter and divine justice. The initial confusion gives way to terror as Odysseus proclaims his true identity. You dogs, you never thought I would return from Troy... Now death's cords have fallen upon you all. This declaration transforms the violence from mere personal vengeance into divine justice, inevitable consequence of their profound violations of Xenia and the moral order, with and the loyal servants, and the cowherd Philetius, secured inside. The systematic slaughter begins. Odysseus fires arrows until his quiver is empty, then fights with spear and sword. Athena appears as mentor, and though she holds back at first to test the hero's courage, she eventually intervenes, displaying her aegis to fill the suitors with supernatural panic. Homer depicts the violence with unflinching detail, rendering the suitors as hunted animals like fish gasping on shore or doves caught in a net, emphasizing their sudden transformation from predators to prey. Mercy is granted only to the bard Phemius and the herald maiden at Telemachus's intervention, demonstrating the young man's emerging temperance and ethical judgment. The post-battle purge is brutal. The disloyal serving women are hanged, a grim extension of the purge, and the traitorous Melanius suffers an agonizing mutilation. Odysseus then orders the hall to be fumigated with burning sulfur, a ritual purification to cleanse the physical space corrupted by transgression. Part 6. The Aftermath, Peace and Memory, the final intimate test with the external threat eliminated. The final challenge remains: the reunion with Penelope. When Euryclea rushes to inform the queen, Penelope's response is one of studied skepticism, refusing to surrender her hard-won emotional discipline to what might be another deception. She insists on private confirmation over public testimony. We will know each other better than anyone, for we have signs known only to the two of us. This cautious wisdom reflects her understanding of the epic's reality, where identities are malleable and easily falsified. Odysseus respects her prudence, viewing her caution as a mark of their compatibility to create cover. Odysseus orchestrates a mock wedding feast outside, masking the carnage within. The sign of the bed Penelope sets her subtle trap by ordering the servants to move the royal bed for the stranger. Odysseus responds with controlled outrage. "Woman, you cut me to the heart. Who has moved my bed?" He then recounts, in precise detail, how he built their marriage bed around a living olive tree that grew within the palace walls. This immovable natural center is the perfect symbol for their marriage, rooted, crafted with skill, and built to endure. This revelation, known only to them and one servant, is the irrefutable sign Penelope sought. Her caution breaks. She rushes to him, embracing him with tears, comparing his return to the sight of land for a drowning sailor, the same metaphor used for his physical salvation, only now recognized by the one who knows him most intimately. Has his Nostos truly achieved emotional completion? Their reunion extends through the night as they exchange narratives, integrating their separate stories into a shared history and re-establishing the deep understanding that forms the core of their relationship. The slaughter of the suitors restored justice and order. The recognition by Penelope restored intimacy and identity. Part 7. Closure and Legacy. The restoration of order, divine intervention, and intimate reconciliation as dawn approaches. Athena intervenes to extend the night of reunion, an act known as chronochrorasia, the manipulation of time, emphasizing the cosmic significance of Odysseus and Penelope's bond. Their physical coming together represents not just the satisfaction of desire, but the restoration of proper cosmic and human order. With morning, the lingering threats become apparent: the vengeance of the suitors' families and the unfulfilled prophecy of Tiresias, requiring a final inland journey. The reunion with Laertes. Odysseus's concept of homecoming Nostos is expansive, requiring reconnection to his heritage. He seeks out his aging father Laertes, who has retreated to a farm, living in self-imposed squalor as a physical manifestation of his grief. In a final instance of testing, Odysseus approaches his father in one last false identity. When Laertes, broken by hearing his son spoken of as permanently absent, pours dust over his head, Odysseus's resolve breaks. He embraces his father, offering proof of his identity through knowledge of the Orchard botanical catalogue of their shared past. The scene beautifully integrates three generations: Laertes, Odysseus, and Telemachus at the farm, symbolizing the continuity of the royal line and counterbalancing the disruption of the 20-year absence. The final conflict and imposed peace news of the slaughter spreads, and the families of the slain suitors, led by Eupeithes Antonius' father, arm for vengeance. The impending civil war threatens to taint Odysseus' triumph with an endless blood feud, a cycle of retaliation recognized as an almost inevitable consequence in ancient Greek society. Zeus and Athena confer and determine that enough blood has been shed. Athena descends to the battlefield and halts the combat with a thunderous command. This divine imposition of peace, a common epic device known as Deus Ex Machina, provides a clear, extra-legal resolution to a conflict human society alone could not escape. It establishes a formal pact between Odysseus and the families, overseen by Athena disguised as mentor. This political resolution, the re-establishment of order in the kingdom, complements the domestic restoration, the reunions with Penelope and Laertes. The epic formally concludes with peace restored to Ithaca, and Odysseus fully reintegrated as husband, father, son, and king. Epilogue, legacy and enduring resonance. The unfinished Nastasia myth leaves the audience with the awareness that Odysseus' story is not fully complete. The prophecy of Tiresias, the final inland journey until he reaches people who mistake an oar for a winnowing fan, remains unfulfilled. This unfinished business suggests that even the most perfect homecoming contains the seeds of future departure. Odysseus, the polytropos, may find stability but never stasis. This open-ended quality distinguishes the Odyssey from narratives of simple closure. The cultural voyage of the Odyssey's influence began in ancient Greece as a foundational text for moral, historical, and religious guidance. Classical tradition, the Romans, particularly Virgil's Aeneid, drew heavily on its structure and themes. Byzantine scholars preserved the original Greek texts, maintaining the epic's survival through the medieval period. Renaissance and modernity. The Renaissance enthusiastically rediscovered Homer. Later, modernist writers saw in Odysseus's fragmented journey a metaphor for contemporary dislocation. James Joyce's Ulysses 1922 is perhaps the most ambitious response, mapping the epic's events onto a single day in modern Dublin, underscoring the timelessness of Homeric themes. Ubiquitous influence. The epic has permeated all artistic media: painting, music, and film. Terms like siren, song, and between Scylla and Charybdis have entered common language, transcending their source to become universal metaphors for temptation and impossible choice. The source of immortal resonance. Odyssey persists because of its unique balance of opposites: adventure and homecoming, individualism and community, fantasy and realism, humanity of the hero. Odysseus embodies this balance. He faces gods and monsters, yet his core struggle is recognizably human, dealing with desire, flaw, and enduring relationships. His defining quality, adaptability, makes him paradoxically timeless, a protagonist ideal for a world in constant flux. The universal dynamic. The tension between wandering and return represents a fundamental human dynamic. As the world becomes increasingly mobile, the epic's meditation on home's meaning and the necessity of preserving connection has grown ever more relevant. Narrative sophistication. Its complex temporal structure, shifts in perspective, and blend of genres: adventure, romance, family drama reward endless reinterpretation. Contemporary translations like Emily Wilson's recent version and reimaginings like those by Derek Walcott and Margaret Atwood, ensure the Odyssey remains a living cultural force, continually renewed by changing contexts. The epic concludes not with a final destination, but with a nuanced vision. Meaningful identity requires both movement and return, both adaptation and continuity. Odysseus' story acknowledges both human vulnerability and resilience. His homecoming is a perfect, yet fragile, moment of peace, one that reminds us all of the profound reward in the struggle to achieve and hold on to the irreplaceable experience of belonging. The foundations of Rome, 753 BCE to 509 BCE. The narrative of Rome's origins is less a matter of certain history and more a tapestry woven from myth, legend, and scattered archaeological fragments. Roman tradition traces the city's beginnings to the divine and improbable birth of twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, born to the Vestal Virgin Rhea Silvia and the war god Mars. The twins were set adrift on the Tiber River by a fearful king. Miraculously, the river carried them to safety, where a she-wolf, or lupa, nurtured them. They were subsequently discovered and raised by a shepherd named Faustulus. Coming of age, the young men learned of their royal lineage and resolved to found a new city on the very spot where they had been saved. A fierce dispute arose over which of the brothers would rule, culminating in a fateful act that would echo through Roman history. Romulus killed Remus, establishing himself as the city's sole founder. In the year 753 BCE, a date from which Romans would later calculate their history, Romulus ritually marked the city's boundaries with a plough on what is now the Palatine Hill. The nascent settlement was initially little more than a collection of simple huts, surrounded by the more powerful Etruscan cities to the north and Greek colonies to the south. To strengthen his fledgling community, Romulus adopted a policy of asylum, offering sanctuary to outlaws, exiles, and refugees from the surrounding regions. This strategy created a severe demographic imbalance with a marked shortage of women. Romulus addressed this issue through the infamous event known as the Rape of the Sabine Women, where he invited the neighboring Sabines to a festival and, in a pre-planned act, abducted their daughters to serve as wives for the Roman men. For the next 2.5 centuries, Rome was governed by 7 successive monarchs who guided its transformation from a village into a regional power. Numa Pompilius, the second king, remembered for his piety and wisdom, is credited with establishing many of Rome's fundamental religious traditions. He created the position of Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest, and founded the Temple of Janus, whose gates were closed only in times of peace, a rare occurrence in the city's history. Tullus Hostilius, this martial king, expanded Roman territory through warfare, most notably against the neighboring city of Alba Longa. Under his rule, Rome began a pattern of assimilation, absorbing conquered populations into its own citizenry. The legendary combat between the Horatii and Curiati triplets, representing Rome and Alba Longa respectively, is said to have occurred during this era. Ancus Marcius, the fourth king. Ancus Marcius focused on infrastructure. He oversaw the construction of Rome's first bridge across the Tiber and the founding of the port city of Ostia at the river's mouth. This opened up crucial trade routes that would eventually connect Rome to the broader Mediterranean world. Tarquinius Priscus, with the reign of this king, Etruscan influence became more pronounced in Roman culture. He initiated the construction of monumental public works, including the Great Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill and the Circus Maximus for chariot races. The massive drainage project of the Cloaca Maxima, which transformed the swampy lowlands into the future Roman Forum, also began under his rule. Servius Tullius, the sixth king. Servius Tullius implemented Rome's first constitution, organizing citizens into classes based on wealth and military capacity. This structure, known as the Centuriate Assembly, became a cornerstone of Roman political and military life for centuries. He also oversaw the construction of the first defensive wall encompassing the famous 7 hills of Rome Palatine: Aventine, Capitoline, Quirinal, Viminal, and Celian. Tarquinius Superbus, the final king, Tarquin the Proud, ruled as a tyrant. While he completed impressive building projects, his arrogance and cruelty alienated the Roman elite. The final straw was the rape of the virtuous noblewoman Lucretia by his son Sextus Tarquinius. This outrage sparked a rebellion led by Lucius Junius Brutus and Lucretia's husband, Lucius Tarquinius Calat. In 509 BCE, the monarchy was overthrown, and the Roman Republic was born. This new system of governance, designed to prevent the concentration of power in a single individual, would not only shape Rome's future but also influence political thought for millennia. The early Roman character was forged in this foundational period, defined by adaptability and a genius for practical engineering and legal organization. By the end of the monarchy, the population had swelled to approximately 35,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in central Italy. Early Roman society was centered on the family, with a paterfamilias, or male head of household, wielding near absolute authority. Meticulous religious observance was paramount, as Romans believed proper rituals maintained the Pax Deorum, or peace of the gods, essential for the city's prosperity. The Roman Republic 509 BCE to 27 BCE. As the last king of Rome fled into exile, the populace stood at the dawn of a new era. The monarchy that had guided the city's early growth was replaced by a bold experiment in governance that would shape Rome's destiny for the next 5 centuries. The newly established republic was meticulously designed to prevent the concentration of power that had led to the tyranny of Tarquinius Superbus. 2 annually elected magistrates, known as consuls, replaced the single king, each possessing the power to veto the other's decisions. Behind the consuls stood the Senate, a council of elders from noble families whose advice carried immense weight. Even without formal legislative power, the early republic faced immediate threats, both internal and external. The exiled king sought to reclaim his throne with the help of neighboring cities, while the powerful Etruscan lord Lars Porsena laid siege to Rome. According to legend, the Roman hero Horatius Cocles single-handedly defended a bridge against the Etruscan army, saving the city from capture. Rome's internal politics proved just as challenging as its external enemies. The Republic was initially dominated by the patricians, hereditary nobles who controlled political and religious institutions. The majority of citizens, known as plebeians, were excluded from power and often trapped in debt bondage to patrician landowners. This class tension would define Roman politics for centuries. The first major social crisis occurred when plebeian soldiers, the backbone of Rome's military, staged a withdrawal to the Sacred Mount, a move that is considered history's first recorded general strike. This drastic action compelled the patricians to create the office of tribune of the plebs, magistrates with the authority to veto legislation harmful to plebeian interests. Tribunes were declared sacrosanct, meaning anyone who harmed them faced religious condemnation and death. Another significant development was the creation of the 12 Tables, Rome's first written law code, which was displayed in the Forum for all to see. This brought a new transparency to legal procedures, which had previously been controlled in secret by patricians, while still favoring the elite in many respects. The 12 Tables represented a crucial step toward greater equality under the law and established the principle that laws should be public knowledge. As Rome resolved its internal challenges, it gradually expanded its influence throughout central Italy. This expansion faced a devastating setback in 390 BCE when Celtic Gauls defeated the Roman army at the Allia River and proceeded to sack Rome itself. The city was largely destroyed, though defenders held out on the Capitoline Hill. Legend has it that sacred geese in the Temple of Juno warned the Romans of a night attack, saving the citadel. The Gauls eventually withdrew after receiving a ransom of gold. But the traumatic memory of this disaster would remain a part of Roman consciousness for centuries. Remarkably, Rome rebounded swiftly from this catastrophe, rebuilding the city and constructing stronger walls. The city defeated the Latin League, incorporating these related peoples into its growing state. Some communities received full Roman citizenship, while others were granted partial rights, establishing a system of graduated citizenship that became a hallmark of Roman statecraft. The middle years of the Republic saw significant political reforms. The Licinian sextion laws required that one consul must be a plebeian, opening the highest office to nobles. Over the following decades, plebeians gained access to all major magistracies and religious offices, while wealth rather than birth increasingly determined political opportunity. This process of social integration helped Rome avoid the destructive class conflicts that plagued many Greek city-states. Rome's growing power inevitably brought it into conflict with other regional powers. Through 3 grueling wars against the mountain peoples known as the Samnites, Rome extended its control from coast to coast across the Italian peninsula. As Rome consolidated its position, it encountered the sophisticated Greek cities of Magna Graecia in southern Italy. The most powerful of these, Tarentum, called for help from Pyrrhus, king of Epirus in Greece. Pyrrhus arrived in Italy with a formidable force, including war elephants, which were previously unknown to the Romans. Despite winning several battles against the Roman legions, Pyrrhus suffered such heavy casualties that these Pyrrhic victories ultimately depleted his forces. The Greek cities were soon left to face Rome alone. Rome's governance of its new Italian confederacy demonstrated remarkable wisdom. While maintaining firm control over foreign policy and military affairs, Rome allowed its allies to retain local autonomy. This Italian alliance system provided Rome with a decisive advantage in the conflicts to come, giving it a manpower base far superior to any rival in the Mediterranean. United Italy represented a geopolitical revolution, and Rome's attention soon turned beyond the peninsula to Sicily, where Carthage, a powerful maritime empire in North Africa, controlled the western portion of the island. When a group of Italian mercenaries known as the Mamertines requested Roman protection against the Carthaginians, Rome faced a momentous choice. Intervention would mean war with Carthage, a naval power with centuries of maritime experience that Rome lacked. The Senate's decision to accept the Mamertine appeal triggered the First Punic War to 64241 BC. This conflict forced Rome to develop naval capabilities from scratch. After early defeats, the Romans captured a Carthaginian ship and used it as a template to build their own fleet, equipping their vessels with a corvus, a boarding bridge that allowed Roman soldiers to use their superior infantry skills in naval combat. Despite catastrophic losses to storms and battles, Roman persistence eventually prevailed. Carthage ceded Sicily to Rome and paid a substantial indemnity. The Second Punic War, 218–201 BCE, brought Rome closer to destruction than any conflict since the Gallic sack. The brilliant Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca led an army, complete with war elephants, from Spain across the Alps into Italy. He inflicted 3 catastrophic defeats on Roman armies at the Trebia River, Lake Trasimene, and, most devastatingly, at Cannae, where perhaps 50,000 Romans perished in a single day. Despite these disasters, Rome refused to surrender. While Hannibal marched through Italy, Rome raised new armies. The general Quintus Fabius Maximus adopted delaying tactics, while a young commander named Scipio took the war to Spain and then to Africa. Faced with a threat to Carthage itself, Hannibal was recalled from Italy. At the Battle of Zamor, Scipio, now called Africanus, defeated Hannibal, ending the war. Victory over Carthage established Rome as the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. Rome's attention then turned eastward to the Hellenistic kingdoms that had emerged from Alexander the Great's empire. The Roman legions defeated King Philip V of Macedon, and subsequently overcame the Seleucid king Antiochus III. The same year, a third Punic War ended with the complete destruction of Carthage. These conquests profoundly transformed Roman society. Enormous wealth flowed into Italy from new provinces, enriching both the state and private individuals. Slaves captured in war became abundant, changing the nature of Italian agriculture as small farms gave way to large, slave-worked estates. Many displaced rural citizens migrated to Rome, creating social tensions. The republican political system, designed for a small city-state, struggled to administer a vast Mediterranean empire. Governors often exploited their positions for personal gain, and successful generals commanded the loyalty of their troops, creating a potential threat to civilian authority. The traditional Roman values of simplicity, duty, and self-sacrifice, what Romans called mos, maiaram, or the way of the elders, seemed to wane as luxury and ambition increased. These changes set the stage for the tumultuous final century of the Republic. The Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, proposed land redistribution and other reforms to address social inequality. But their efforts were met with fierce opposition from wealthy senators. Both were assassinated, shattering the traditional consensus of the ruling elite and introducing political violence as a tool in Roman politics. In the decades that followed, ambitious generals like Marius and Sulla used their military power to intervene in political disputes. Sulla's march on Rome marked the first time a Roman general turned his army against the city itself. After defeating his rivals in a bloody civil war, he had himself appointed dictator and conducted systematic purges of his enemies. Though Sulla eventually retired, his actions created a dangerous precedent. 3 powerful men, Pompey and Julius Caesar, formed an unofficial coalition known as the First Triumvirate to dominate Roman politics. Caesar secured command in Gaul, where his brilliant campaigns conquered modern France, earning him unprecedented wealth, military experience, and popularity. When the alliance fractured, the Senate aligned with Pompey against Caesar. Ordered to surrender his command, Caesar famously crossed the Rubicon River with his army, igniting a civil war with the declaration, Alia iacta est the dies cast. After defeating Pompey's forces, Caesar became dictator of Rome, implementing numerous reforms. However, his increasing honors and lifetime dictatorship alarmed republicans who saw him as aspiring to monarchy. On the Ides of March in 44 BCE, conspirators led by Brutus and Cassius assassinated Caesar in the Senate House. Rather than restoring the Republic, Caesar's murder triggered renewed civil war. His adopted son, Octavian, joined with Mark Antony and Lepidus in the Second Triumvirate to hunt down Caesar's killers. After defeating Brutus and Cassius at Philippi, the triumvirs divided the Roman world among themselves. Tensions inevitably emerged, particularly between Octavian in the west and Antony in the east, where he allied himself with Egypt's queen, Cleopatra. 7. The final showdown came at the Battle of Actium, where Octavian's forces defeated the combined fleet of Antony and Cleopatra. The lovers fled to Egypt, where they later committed suicide. Octavian, now the sole ruler of Rome's vast territories, carefully avoided Caesar's mistakes. While accumulating unprecedented personal power, he maintained the facade of republican government, referring to himself as Princeps first citizen rather than king or dictator. In 27 BCE, the Senate awarded him the title Augustus, marking the effective end of the Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire. The legacy of the Republic was complex. Its constitutional balance ultimately failed to prevent civil war and dictatorship. Yet during its 5 centuries, Rome had evolved from a small Italian city-state to the master of the Mediterranean world. Republican institutions would continue in name under the emperors, and its ideals of liberty, civic duty, and constitutional government would echo through Western political thought for millennia to come. The early empire 27 BCA, 180 C, when Octavian stood before the Senate in January of 27 BCE, Rome stood at a crossroads. The Republic, which had governed for 5 centuries, lay in ruins after decades of civil war. Yet rather than claiming outright monarchy, Octavian performed a masterful political dance. He announced the restoration of the Republic by seemingly relinquishing the extraordinary authority he had accumulated. The Senate, filled with his supporters, responded by granting him the name Augustus, a title with religious overtones suggesting one who is revered or sacred. They also awarded him a carefully assembled package of powers, including command of key provinces where legions were stationed and tribunician authority, giving him veto power. Con licencia de Google. This moment marked the birth of what historians call the Principate, a system where Augustus ruled as first citizen rather than king, maintaining the facade of republican government while wielding unprecedented personal power. Augustus would rule for 41 years, establishing patterns that would define Roman imperial governance for centuries. He reduced the army from 60 legions to 28, settling veterans in colonies throughout the empire. He reformed the tax system, established a postal service, created firefighting cohorts, and organized a permanent police force in Rome. His building projects transformed the capital so much that he famously boasted of finding Rome a city of brick and leaving it a city of marble in foreign affairs. Augustus secured and expanded Roman frontiers. Germanic tribes were pushed back beyond the Rhine, while the empire's eastern boundary was secured through diplomacy with the Parthian Empire. Spain was finally fully conquered after centuries of resistance, and the Danube became Rome's northern frontier in Europe. Perhaps most crucially, Augustus created a stable system of succession. Having no son, he gradually elevated his stepson, Tiberius, to prominence, ensuring a smooth transfer of power upon his death. Tiberius, a capable general but a reluctant ruler, began a dynasty known as the Julio-Claudians that would govern Rome for more than 50 years. His rule started well, but grew increasingly dark after he withdrew to the island of Capri, leaving affairs of state to the ambitious Praetorian prefect Sejanus. After uncovering Sejanus's plot to seize power, Tiberius launched a wave of treason trials that spread fear through the Roman aristocracy. Tiberius was succeeded by his grandnephew, Caligula, whose early promise devolved into apparent madness. Stories of his excesses, cruelty, and bizarre behavior, including plans to make his horse a consul, may be exaggerated. But his assassination, after just 4 years, speaks to his unpopularity among the Roman elite. The Praetorian Guard then elevated Claudius to the throne. Despite physical disabilities that had led his family to sideline him, Claudius proved to be an able administrator. During his 13-year reign, he expanded the empire by conquering Britain and incorporating new provinces in the east. He also extended citizenship more widely and admitted Gauls to the Senate, recognizing that Rome's future lay in provincial integration rather than Italian domination. The Julio-Claudian dynasty ended with Nero, who began his reign promisingly under the guidance of the philosopher Seneca, as he asserted his independence. However, his rule grew tyrannical. He had his mother, Agrippina, murdered, and he persecuted Christians after the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. Rising unpopularity led to revolts, and Nero committed suicide, purportedly lamenting, "What an artist dies in me." Nero's death ushered in the chaos known as the Year of 4 Emperors 69 CE. In quick succession, the generals Galba, Otho, and Vitellius claimed the throne, each overthrown by military revolt. Finally, Vespasian, commanding the Eastern legions, emerged victorious, establishing the Flavian dynasty. Vespasian brought stability back to the empire during his 10-year reign. A man of humble origins with a practical approach to governance, he restored fiscal responsibility after Nero's extravagance. His greatest architectural legacy was beginning construction of the Flavian Amphitheatre, better known today as the Colosseum, built on the site of Nero's opulent palace as a gift to the Roman people. His eldest son, Titus, succeeded him, just months before Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE, destroying the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. Titus handled this and other disasters, including a fire in Rome, with such compassion that he was widely mourned when he died after just 2 years of rule. The final Flavian emperor was Domitian, whose 15-year reign witnessed significant military activity along the Danube frontier and in Britain. While an effective administrator, his autocratic tendencies alienated the Senate. His assassination brought the Flavian dynasty to an end. The Senate then selected one of its own members, the elderly Nerva, as emperor, with no natural heir and limited military support. Nerva adopted the popular general Trajan as his successor, establishing a pattern of adoptive succession that would serve Rome brilliantly for nearly a century. Trajan, born in Spain, became the first emperor from outside Italy. His 19-year reign saw the Roman Empire reach its greatest territorial extent. He conquered Dacia, roughly modern Romania, incorporating its gold mines into the empire. And his most ambitious campaign annexed Armenia, Mesopotamia, and parts of Parthia, briefly extending Roman rule to the Persian Gulf. Beyond military glory, Trajan was celebrated for his domestic policies. His extensive building programs included a massive forum in Rome, and he established a welfare program providing support for poor children in Italy. On his deathbed, Trajan may have adopted his relative Hadrian, though some suspected the adoption was fabricated by Hadrian's supporters. Regardless, Hadrian became emperor and immediately shifted imperial policy, recognizing that the empire had reached its practical limits. He withdrew from Trajan's eastern conquests and focused on consolidation rather than expansion. Hadrian spent more than half of his 21-year reign traveling throughout the provinces, inspecting frontier defenses. In Britain, he ordered the construction of a massive wall spanning the island's narrow northern waist, creating a barrier against tribal incursions. A lover of Greek culture, Hadrian's architectural legacy in Rome included the Pantheon, with its revolutionary concrete dome that still stands today as a testament to Roman engineering brilliance. Hadrian's chosen successor, Antoninus Pius, ruled for 23 remarkably peaceful years. His reign saw no major wars or internal disturbances, allowing the empire to prosper. Continuing the tradition of adoption, Antoninus selected Marcus Aurelius as his heir, with the provision that Marcus, in turn, adopt Lucius Verus as Marcus Aurelius, a devoted Stoic philosopher whose meditations remain widely read today, found his reign dominated by military challenges despite his philosophical nature. Germanic tribes began pressing against Roman frontiers on the Danube, and the empire faced a devastating pandemic known as the Antonine Plague, possibly smallpox, which killed perhaps 5 million people throughout Roman territories. Despite these challenges, Marcus Aurelius maintained the frontiers before his death. Unlike his predecessors, who chose the most qualified successor through adoption, Marcus allowed his biological son, Commodus, to succeed him, a decision that would have dire consequences for Rome. Looking back across this two-century span from Augustus to Marcus Aurelius, this era represents the Roman Empire at its zenith. The population reached perhaps 70 million people living in relative security under the Pax Romana, or Roman peace. A vast network of roads, totaling over 250,000 miles, facilitated trade, communication, and military movement throughout the Mediterranean basin. Cities flourished with public amenities unknown in earlier ages, such as aqueducts, public baths, theaters, and forums. Roman law, increasingly sophisticated and humane, was administered across 3 continents. Perhaps most significantly, this period saw the birth and early spread of Christianity. Jesus of Nazareth lived and died during the reign of Tiberius, and the new religion slowly spread throughout the empire despite sporadic persecution. By the time of Marcus Aurelius, Christian communities existed in most major cities, laying the foundation for developments that would transform the later empire. This remarkable era of stability and prosperity rested on several pillars: the Augustan settlement that balanced imperial power with respect for tradition, the adoption system that produced a series of capable rulers, secure frontiers that prevented major invasions, and an economy that, despite its limitations by modern standards, generated sufficient surplus to maintain urban civilization and a standing army of nearly 400,000 men. As Marcus Aurelius drew his final breath on the Danubian frontier, none could foresee that this golden age was ending. Crisis and recovery 180 CE to 284 CE. The golden age of the Roman Empire began to dim as Commodus assumed the purple following the death of Marcus Aurelius. Unlike his philosophical father, Commodus had little interest in the burdens of governance. Handsome and athletic, he preferred the gladiatorial arena to the council chamber. He often fought in staged combats, charging the imperial treasury enormous sums for his appearances and boasting of thousands of victories against opponents who dared not defeat him. While Commodus indulged his fantasies, renaming Rome Colonia Comediana and styling himself as the reincarnation of Hercules. The machinery of empire continued functioning through the efforts of experienced administrators. Yet his capricious executions of senators and officials created a climate of fear. Upon his death on the final day of the year 192 CE, Commodus was strangled in his bath by his wrestling partner, Narcissus, an act orchestrated by his inner circle, who feared they would be next to face his wrath. After Commodus' assassination, the respected General Pertinax was elevated to the throne by the Senate. His attempts to restore discipline within the Praetorian Guard proved fatal. They murdered him after just 3 months when he refused their demands for a special bonus. What followed was perhaps the most shameful episode in Roman history. The Praetorians literally auctioned the empire to the highest bidder. Didius Julianus, a wealthy senator, won this dubious honor, but his reign lasted only 66 days. Provincial armies, disgusted by the events in Rome, put forward their own commanders as imperial candidates. From this chaos emerged Septimius Severus, commander of the Pannonian legions. He marched on Rome, disbanded the disgraced Praetorians, and established a new dynasty. A capable soldier, Severus secured his position through a combination of military victories and the ruthless elimination of rivals. Born in Leptis Magna in North Africa, he was the first emperor from that continent and reportedly spoke Latin with an accent. His reign brought significant changes to Roman governance, particularly the increasing militarization of the administration and greater reliance on equestrians rather than senators for key positions. During his 18-year rule, Severus conducted successful campaigns against the Parthian Empire in the east, creating the new province of Mesopotamia with its rich farmlands. He also traveled to Britain to strengthen Hadrian's Wall and campaign against the Caledonians in Scotland. It was there, in the northern outpost of Eboracum, modern York, that he died, purportedly advising his sons to enrich the soldiers and scorn everyone else. Those sons, Caracalla and Geta, were intended to rule jointly, but their hatred for each other made cooperation impossible. Within a year, Caracalla had his brother murdered in their mother's arms and ordered a damnatio memoriae Geta from all official records and monuments. Despite his cruelty, Caracalla issued one of the most significant edicts in Roman history, the Constitutio Antoniana of 212 CE, which granted Roman citizenship to all free men within the empire, while partially motivated by a desire to increase tax revenue. This decree formalized Rome's evolution from a city-state into a universal empire, where citizenship was defined by law rather than by ethnic origin. Caracalla was assassinated while campaigning in the east. The Severan dynasty continued through a series of rulers connected by the remarkable women of the family, particularly Julia Maesa, sister-in-law of Septimius Severus, who engineered the rise of her grandsons Elagabalus and later Severus Alexander. Elagabalus scandalized Rome with his religious devotion to the Eastern sun god whose name he bore, attempting to make this cult supreme over traditional Roman worship. After 4 years, the Praetorians murdered him. His cousin, Severus Alexander, just 13 when he ascended the throne, ruled under the regency of his mother, Julia Mamaea. His 13-year reign attempted to restore good relations with the Senate and traditional values, but military challenges were mounting. A new Persian dynasty, the Sassanids, had replaced the Parthians and posed a greater threat in the east. Meanwhile, Germanic tribes increased pressure on the Rhine and Danube frontiers. When Severus Alexander negotiated with Germanic tribes rather than fighting them, his troops mutinied and proclaimed Maximinus Thrax a giant former shepherd from Thrace. As Emperor Maximinus represented a new type of emperor, a soldier of humble origins with little education or refinement who rose through military merit alone. Though an effective general, his harsh taxation to fund military campaigns made him deeply unpopular with civilians. The Senate, desperate to restore their influence, supported a revolt led by the elderly governor Gordian and his son in Africa. This dizzying sequence of emperors and usurpers inaugurated what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century. Over the next 5 decades, at least 26 men claimed the imperial title, most ruling for just a few years before meeting violent ends. The Roman world seemed to be unraveling as the imperial office became the prize in an endless, destructive military lottery. External threats compounded the internal chaos. The Emperor Odysseus and his son died fighting Goths at the Battle of Abritus in 251 CE, the first Roman emperor to fall in battle against foreign enemies. The Emperor Valerian suffered an even worse fate. He was captured alive by the Sassanid Persian king Shapur I and allegedly used as a human footstool before being skinned after death and stuffed as a trophy. With central authority collapsing, the empire began to fragment. In the west, a Gallic empire encompassing Gaul, Britain, and parts of Spain broke away under a succession of local rulers. In the east, the desert trading city of Palmyra under Queen Zenobia established control over provinces from Egypt to Asia Minor. Economic crisis accompanied this political disintegration, as the currency was repeatedly debased to pay the armies, triggering severe inflation. It seemed Rome's 1,000-year story might be approaching its end. Yet even in this darkest hour, resilient structures and capable individuals emerged to pull the empire back from the brink. The turning point came with the accession of Claudius to Gaul. In his brief 2-year reign, he defeated Gothic invaders in the Balkans so decisively that he earned the title Gothicus. Though he died of plague, his work was continued by Aurelian, acclaimed by his troops following Claudius' death. Aurelian's 5-year reign earned him the title Restorer of the World Hestituta Orbis. He defeated the Palmyrene Empire, bringing Queen Zenobia to Rome in golden chains for his triumph. He then recovered the breakaway Gallic provinces, reunifying the empire. To protect Rome itself from barbarian raids, he built a massive new war circuit that still stands partially intact today. Aurelian's assassination, based on a false claim by a secretary, threatened to unravel his achievements. Several short-lived emperors followed before Diocletian, a cavalry commander of humble Dalmatian origin, was acclaimed emperor. Diocletian immediately executed Aper, a Latin word for boar, the Praetorian prefect who had murdered his predecessor, fulfilling a prophecy that he would become emperor after killing the boar. With Diocletian's accession, the crisis period finally ended. Though the empire had survived, it was profoundly transformed. The old Augustan Principate, with its careful balance of republican forms and imperial power, was gone. In its place stood a more overtly autocratic system where the emperor was increasingly seen as a remote, sacred figure rather than a first among equals. Military needs now dominated all aspects of governance. The army had nearly doubled in size to face multiple frontier threats, consuming an ever larger share of the state's resources. Taxation had grown heavier and more systematic to support these forces. The distinction between Italy and the provinces had largely vanished as the entire empire shouldered similar burdens. Yet despite the trauma of the 3rd century crisis, important cultural developments continued. This period saw the rise of Neoplatonism through philosophers like Plotinus, whose mystical vision of reality would deeply influence later Christian thought. Christianity itself spread widely during these troubled decades, offering spiritual solace and community in uncertain times. The religion that had once been a persecuted minority was becoming a major force in Roman society. As the 3rd century closed, the empire that Diocletian inherited was wounded but not defeated. The late empire 284 CE, 2395 CE, as Diocletian stood victorious after claiming the purple, the Roman world lay exhausted from a half-century of crisis. Drawing lessons from this turmoil, the new emperor would reshape imperial governance more dramatically than anyone since Augustus. Born to a humble family in Dalmatia on the Adriatic coast, Diocletian had risen through military service without the benefit of aristocratic connections. This outsider's perspective perhaps allowed him to see more clearly the systemic problems facing Rome. The empire had grown too vast and complex for a single ruler to manage effectively. Military emergencies on one frontier often required the emperor's presence, just as crises erupted elsewhere. Recognizing this reality, Diocletian took the unprecedented step of appointing a co-emperor. He elevated his fellow officer Maximian to the rank of Augustus, assigning him responsibility for the western provinces while Diocletian focused on the east. This division proved insufficient, so Diocletian expanded the imperial college further by appointing 2 junior emperors called Caesars Galerius in the east and Constantius Chlorus in the west. This system, known as the Tetrarchy, or Rule of 4, divided administrative responsibilities while maintaining the fiction of a unified empire. Each tetrarch governed a quarter of Roman territory from his own capital city, as Rome itself lost its central role. The arrangement included a plan for orderly succession after 20 years. The senior Augusti would retire, allowing the Caesars to be promoted and select new junior colleagues. This mechanism aimed to prevent the succession crises that had plagued the 3rd century. Beyond restructuring imperial leadership, Diocletian reorganized the empire's administrative geography. Provinces were subdivided into smaller units, nearly doubling their number but making them more manageable. These provinces were then grouped into 12 dioceses, themselves organized into 4 prefectures corresponding to each tetrarch's territory. This created multiple layers of oversight intended to reduce corruption and improve efficiency. The military underwent similar reorganization. Diocletian separated civil and military authority, which had traditionally been combined in provincial governors. He also substantially increased the size of the army to address multiple frontier threats simultaneously, to limit the power of potentially rebellious generals. He reduced the size of provincial armies while creating a central mobile reserve that could respond to crises. These expanded military and administrative structures required greater resources. Diocletian implemented a comprehensive census to identify taxable wealth and individuals. His new tax system required payment in kind rather than increasingly worthless currency, with set quotas of produce and goods collected from each region. To ensure essential services continued, Diocletian mandated hereditary occupations for certain vital professions, binding sons to follow their father's trades. While these reforms stabilized the empire, they came at the cost of significantly increased state control over individual lives. The free market economy of the early empire gave way to a more regulated system where the state's needs took precedence over private initiative in religious matters. Diocletian initially showed tolerance, but later launched what became known as the Great Persecution against Christians. This final and most severe attempt to suppress Christianity included the destruction of churches, confiscation of scripture, and execution of clergy. Despite its intensity, the persecution varied by region and failed to halt Christianity's spread. True to his succession plan, Diocletian took the unprecedented step of voluntarily retiring, compelling his co-Augustus, Maximian, to do the same. He spent his remaining years cultivating cabbages at his palace in Split on the Dalmatian coast, reportedly telling visitors that only someone who had been emperor could understand the pleasures of retirement. The carefully designed tetrarchic system collapsed almost immediately after its creator's retirement. The succession plans were undermined by dynastic sentiment as troops proclaimed Constantine, son of Constantius Chlorus, and Maxentus, son of Maximian, as emperors. The following years saw complex power struggles as various claimants fought for supremacy. Constantine emerged victorious from these conflicts. According to Christian tradition, before the crucial battle of the Milvian Bridge against Maxentus in 312 CE, Constantine saw a vision of a cross in the sky with the words, "In hoc signo vinces, in this sign you will conquer." Whether motivated by genuine conversion or political calculation, Constantine's embrace of Christianity would transform the Roman world. The Edict of Milan, issued jointly with his eastern colleague Licinius in 313 CE, formally ended the persecution of Christians and restored their confiscated property. Though not making Christianity the official state religion, the edict granted it legal status and imperial favor. Constantine later defeated Licinius to become the sole ruler of a reunited empire. Perhaps Constantine's most consequential decision was founding a new capital on the site of the Greek city of Byzantium. Dedicated as Constantinople in 330 CE, it occupied an unparalleled strategic position, controlling the strait between Europe and Asia. This new Christian city, free from Rome's pagan associations, would serve as the imperial capital for over 1,000 years. Constantine maintained many of Diocletian's administrative reforms, while softening their harsher aspects. He created a new gold currency, the solidus, which maintained its value for centuries, bringing monetary stability after decades of inflation. After Constantine's death, the empire passed to his 3 surviving sons. Their reigns were marked by conflict and continuing religious tensions, particularly surrounding the Arian controversy about Christ's divine nature. The brief reign of Julian the Apostate, Constantine's nephew, marked the last serious attempt to restore traditional Roman religion. Raised as a Christian but secretly converting to paganism, Julian sought to revitalize classical culture and reduce Christian privileges during his 18-month rule. His death, fighting the Persians in 363 CE, ended this religious counter-revolution. The emperors who followed Julian maintained Christianity's favored position. Under Theodosius I, Christianity became the official state religion. The Edict of Thessalonica of 380 CE established Nicene Christianity as the empire's sole legitimate faith, while subsequent edicts closed pagan temples and prohibited traditional sacrifices. The millennium-old religious traditions that had sustained Rome since its founding were now officially abandoned. Theodosius also faced significant external challenges. His predecessor Valens had suffered a catastrophic defeat at Adrianople in 378 CE against Gothic forces, with perhaps 2/3 of the eastern field army destroyed and Valens himself killed. This battle demonstrated the growing military threat posed by Germanic peoples seeking land within the empire. Rather than attempting to expel these Goths, Theodosius settled them within imperial territory as federal-allied troops serving under their own leaders while acknowledging Roman sovereignty. This pragmatic solution provided needed manpower but increased the influence of semi-autonomous Germanic groups within Roman borders. The late Roman military relied increasingly on such allied contingents and recruited heavily among Germanic peoples for regular units as well. The stereotype of effete Romans hiring barbarians to fight their battles is oversimplified. Many Romans still served, and many barbarians were thoroughly Romanized. Nevertheless, the army's ethnic composition changed significantly from earlier centuries. Social and economic developments during this period reflected the empire's transformation. Christianity reshaped cultural values, emphasizing otherworldly salvation over classical civic virtues. The urban middle classes declined as imperial service and large agricultural estates dominated economic life. Cities shrank within defensive walls as their classical monuments were cannibalized for building material or converted to Christian use. Yet amid these changes, remarkable cultural achievements continued. This era saw the flowering of patristic literature as Christian thinkers like Ambrose, Jerome, and Augustine developed sophisticated theological and philosophical systems that would influence Western thought for centuries. In law, the Theodosian Code compiled imperial legislation, creating a systematic legal reference that preserved Roman jurisprudence for future generations. Upon Theodosius' death in 395 CE, the empire was divided between his sons, Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west. Though theoretically temporary, this division would prove permanent. While the eastern and western courts maintained the fiction of a unified empire, they increasingly pursued separate interests and faced different challenges. The eastern half, wealthier and better protected geographically, would endure for another 1,000 years as what modern historians call the Byzantine Empire, though its citizens continued to call themselves Romans. The western half faced existential challenges that would lead to its collapse within a single lifetime. The fall of the Western Empire 395 CE to 476 CE as the 5th century dawned. The Roman world stood divided between the sons of Theodosius. While technically ruling a single empire, Arcadius in Constantinople and Honorius in Milan presided over increasingly separate realms. Both young emperors relied heavily on powerful advisors, sparking court intrigues that would weaken imperial authority at precisely the moment when Rome faced its greatest external challenge. The catalyst for the coming crisis was the arrival of the Huns from the Eurasian steppes. Their westward migration pushed Germanic peoples against and ultimately across the Roman frontiers in unprecedented numbers. The most immediate threat came from the Goths, who, after the death of their leader, united under an ambitious new king named Alaric. Alaric's Goths settled within the empire as foederati since their victory at Adrianople, felt mistreated by imperial authorities. When their demands for better terms were rebuffed, they revolted and began moving through the Balkans, alternately negotiating with and threatening both Eastern and Western imperial courts. Stilicho, a general of partial Vandal ancestry but thoroughly Roman in culture and loyalty, handled the Gothic threat with a combination of military action and diplomacy. However, his efforts were undermined by suspicion from both imperial courts, each fearing he sought to control the entire empire. After Stilicho's execution on charges of treason in 408 CE, the Western Empire lost its most capable defender. With Stilicho gone, Alaric saw his opportunity. He invaded Italy and accomplished what had not happened in 8 centuries: the sack of Rome itself in 410 CE, though the Goths remained in the city for only 3 days, and the damage was relatively contained. The psychological impact on the Roman world was immense. The Christian writer Jerome, writing in Bethlehem, lamented that the bright light of all the world was put out, and the whole world perished in one city. After Alaric's death shortly after the sack, the Goths moved into Gaul and eventually settled in Aquitaine as Roman Meanwhile, other Germanic peoples had crossed the frozen Rhine in 406 CE, pouring into Gaul and eventually Spain. These included Vandals, Suvers, and Alans, who established their own territories within nominally Roman provinces. The Western imperial government, now based in Ravenna, for better security than Rome, struggled to respond to these multiple incursions. Increasingly, real power rested with the Magesta Militum, or master of soldiers, the supreme military commander, rather than the emperor himself. For nearly 2 decades, that position was held by Flavius Aetius, sometimes called the last of the Romans. While Aetius worked to maintain what remained of Roman authority in Gaul, a new threat emerged in North Africa. The Vandals, under their king Gazaric, crossed from Spain to Africa in 429 CE, conquering the wealthy provinces that had long supplied Rome with grain. By seizing Carthage, they established a powerful kingdom and built a fleet that would dominate the western Mediterranean. As these settlements of Germanic peoples were unfolding within the empire, the Western Empire faced its most fearsome opponent, Attila the Hun. Having already ravaged the eastern provinces, Attila turned westward. Invading Gaul in 451 CE, Aetius cobbled together a coalition of Roman forces and Germanic federates, including Visigoths, that confronted the Hunnic army at the Battle of the Catalaunian Plains. This desperate defense halted Attila's advance in Gaul. The following year, Attila invaded Italy. Rome seemed doomed until an embassy led by Pope Leo I somehow persuaded the Hun to withdraw. Attila's death shortly after this campaign and the subsequent collapse of Hunnic power gave Rome a brief respite. That same year, however, court intrigue led to the murder of Aetius on the orders of Emperor Valentinian III. The emperor himself was assassinated by Aetius's supporters months later, ending the Theodosian dynasty in the West. What followed was a rapid succession of short-lived emperors, many mere puppets of powerful military commanders. Majorian, who ruled for just a few years, represented the last serious attempt to restore Roman power in the West. His efforts to rebuild the military and recover North Africa from the Vandals ended with his defeat and execution. After Western emperors controlled little beyond Italy itself, with various Germanic kingdoms establishing effective independence in former provinces. By the later decades of the 5th century, the Western emperors had become irrelevant to most of the former provinces. Real power in Italy rested with the military commander Ricimer, and after his death, with his successors, until the German officer Odoacer seized control. In a pragmatic solution, Odoacer deposed the teenage emperor Romulus Augustulus in 476 CE, ending the charade of imperial rule in the West. Odoacer sent the imperial regalia to Emperor Zeno in Constantinople, signaling that a separate Western emperor was unnecessary. He requested and received the title of patrician, governing Italy nominally as Zenos viceroy, but effectively as an independent king. Romulus, still a teenager, was permitted to retire to a country estate with a generous pension, unexpectedly merciful end for a deposed ruler. This moment is traditionally marked as the fall of Rome, or, more accurately, the end of the Western Roman Empire. Yet for people living through these events, there was no dramatic collapse. Many of the structures of Roman life continued under new management. Germanic kings issued laws based on Roman models, maintained a form of tax system, and often employed Roman administrators. Several factors contributed to the Western Empire's failure to withstand the pressures that its Eastern counterparts successfully navigated. The West faced more exposed land frontiers and more frequent invasions. Its economy had been less urbanized and more agrarian than the East's. Even in better times, the wealthy provinces of North Africa and parts of Gaul that had sustained Western finances were lost to Vandals and Visigoths, creating a spiral of declining resources. Western emperors also suffered from a deficit of legitimacy compared to their Eastern colleagues. The constant civil wars and rapid turnover of rulers undermined confidence in imperial authority. Yet, even as direct imperial rule faded, Romanitas Roman culture and identity, Latin remained the language of administration and literacy. The Catholic Church preserved Roman organizational structures and legal concepts. The end of the Western Empire did not mean the end of the Roman world. In the East, the empire continued to flourish from its magnificent capital at Constantinople. The Emperor Zeno and his successors considered themselves the legitimate rulers of the entire Roman world, including the lost western provinces. In Italy itself, Odysseus' rule would prove brief. Emperor Zeno authorized Theodoric, king of the Ostrogoths, to invade Italy and depose Odysseus. After defeating and eventually murdering his rival, Theodoric established a kingdom that represented one of the most successful syntheses of Roman and Germanic elements in the post-imperial West. The end of the Western Roman Empire thus marks not a cataclysmic collapse, but a significant transition point in a much longer process of transformation. The political structure created by Augustus 5 centuries earlier had finally failed in the West. But Roman civilization, like a great river dividing around an obstacle, would continue flowing through new channels in the medieval world to come. The Byzantine Empire, Eastern Roman Empire 476 CE to 1453 CE, while the Western Roman Empire faded into history, its Eastern counterpart continued to thrive. The citizens of this surviving realm never called themselves Byzantine, a term invented by modern historians. They proudly identified as Romans Romaio in their increasingly Greek speech, the rightful inheritors of Caesar and Constantine. For nearly a millennium after the deposition of Romulus Augustulus, this Eastern Roman Empire would preserve and transform the legacy of Rome. As the 5th century closed, Emperor Zeno faced significant challenges. Religious controversies over the nature of Christ divided Eastern Christians, while Isaurian countrymen from Zenos' mountainous homeland dominated the court, breeding resentment among Constantinople's population. Yet the empire remained intact with efficient tax collection, professional administration, and a military security that the fragmented West could only envy. Zeno's successor, Anastasius I, provided 27 years of capable governance. His careful financial stewardship replenished the treasury, while his construction of the long walls protected Constantinople's landward approaches. Though religious tensions continued during his reign, Anastasius maintained the empire's position against Sassanid Persia, its traditional rival in the East. The golden age of the Eastern Roman Empire arrived with the accession of Justinian I in 527 CE. Born to Latin-speaking peasants in the Balkan provinces, Justinian married the remarkable Theodora, whose journey from actress of questionable reputation to imperial consort scandalized conservative circles but brought a shrewd and determined partner to the throne. Justinian's ambition was nothing less than the restoration of imperial unity. He dispatched his brilliant general Belisarius to recover North Africa from the Vandals. Belisarius accomplished this mission with remarkable speed and efficiency, returning the wealthy grain-producing region to imperial control. Emboldened by this success, Justinian authorized the invasion of Ostrogothic Italy. The Italian campaign proved far more difficult. What was planned as a swift reconquest became a 20-year struggle that devastated the peninsula, though imperial forces eventually prevailed, capturing Ravenna and defeating the last Gothic resistance. The cost was enormous. Italy, once the heart of Roman power, lay economically ruined. Parts of Spain were also recovered, but Justinian's dream of full Western restoration remained elusive. These military campaigns stretched imperial resources, already strained by war with Persia. The situation worsened when the bubonic plague reached Constantinople, killing perhaps 40% of the city's inhabitants and spreading throughout the Mediterranean basin. This demographic catastrophe reduced tax revenues and military recruitment, creating fiscal problems that would plague Justinian's successors. Despite these challenges, Justinian's reign witnessed remarkable achievements. The magnificent church of Hagia Sophia, with its revolutionary dome spanning 108 feet, remains one of the world's architectural marvels. Even more enduring was the Corpus Juris Civilis, a comprehensive compilation and reform of Roman law that preserved classical legal principles for future generations. This legal code would eventually form the basis of many European legal systems and represents one of Rome's most significant legacies to the modern world. After Justinian's death, the empire entered a difficult period. His successor, Justin II, lost much of Italy to the Lombards, while warfare with Persia drained resources. The 7th century brought unprecedented challenges to the empire. Under Shah Khosrow II, Persia launched massive invasions, capturing Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and much of Anatolia. Jerusalem fell, and the true cross, the most sacred of Christian relics, was carried to the Persian capital as a trophy. In this moment of supreme crisis, one of Rome's greatest emperors emerged. Heraclius, who had overthrown the tyrant Phocas, personally led the imperial counterattack. In a series of brilliant campaigns, he drove deep into Persian territory, forcing a peace that restored all lost provinces and the true cross. Yet even as Heraclius celebrated his triumph, a new power was emerging in the Arabian desert. United by the Prophet Muhammad and inspired by the new faith of Islam, Arab armies erupted into Roman and Persian territories with astonishing speed. The exhausted Persian Empire collapsed entirely, while Roman forces suffered a crushing defeat at the Battle of Yarmouk in 636 CE. Within a decade, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt's provinces that had been Roman for over 6 centuries fell under Islamic rule. This catastrophic loss of territory transformed the empire. The remaining realm became more compact, centered on Constantinople, Western Asia Minor, and the southern Balkans. Greek definitively replaced Latin as the language of administration, while the empire took on a more explicitly Christian character. Modern historians often mark this 7th century transformation as the transition from the Eastern Roman to the Byzantine Empire, though contemporaries saw no such division. Despite these massive territorial losses, the empire adapted and survived. The theme system, reorganizing provinces into military districts where soldier farmers defended their own lands, proved an effective response to constant Arab raids. Greek fire, a mysterious incendiary weapon that could burn even on water, gave imperial fleets a crucial advantage in defending Constantinople. when Arab forces besieged Constantinople itself on 2 separate occasions. The formidable defenses held firm. The 8th and early 9th centuries brought controversies over religious imagery known as the iconoclastic period. Emperors from Leo III to Theophilus banned the veneration of icons, viewing them as dangerously close to idol worship. This policy divided society and strained relations with Rome and other Western Christians who continued to use sacred images. The restoration of icons healed these divisions and ushered in a period of cultural and intellectual revival. Under the Macedonian dynasty, founded by Basil I, the empire regained its strength. Agricultural production increased, cities revived, and military fortunes improved. Emperors like Nicephorus Phocas and John I Zimisces recaptured territories in Syria, while Basil II earned the sobriquet Bulgar Slayer for his ruthless campaigns that brought all the Balkans under imperial rule. This resurgent Rome, albeit Greek in language and culture, represented the most powerful, wealthy, and sophisticated society in the Christian world. Constantinople, with perhaps 500,000 inhabitants, dwarfed the modest towns of Western Europe. Yet beneath this golden facade, structural weaknesses were developing. The free peasantry that had formed the backbone of the Theme armies gradually lost land to expanding aristocratic estates. Civil service positions increasingly became hereditary rather than merit-based. Religious differences with the Latin West widened, culminating in the Great Schism of 1054, which divided Christianity into Catholic and Orthodox branches. The pivotal disaster came at Manzikert, where Seljuk Turks defeated Emperor Romanos, the 4th Diogenes, and opened Anatolia, the empire's heartland, to Turkish settlement. Simultaneously, Normans conquered the last imperial possessions in Italy. The desperate appeal for Western aid by Emperor Alexios I Komnenos helped trigger the First Crusade. While Crusaders did establish states in the Holy Land, tensions between Latins and Greeks grew increasingly bitter. The Fourth Crusade infamously diverted to Constantinople itself in 1204, sacking the greatest Christian city in the world and establishing a short-lived Latin empire on its ruins, though imperial forces recaptured Constantinople under Michael VIII Palaeologos. The restored empire was but a shadow of its former self. Italian merchant republics dominated its economy, while Serbian and Bulgarian states carved away Balkan territories. Most importantly, Turkish Amorites controlled most of Anatolia, with the aggressive Ottoman state emerging as the greatest threat. The Ottoman Turks crossed into Europe, gradually encircling Constantinople. Despite desperate diplomatic efforts to secure Western aid, support proved minimal. Emperor Constantine XI faced the massive Ottoman army of Sultan Mehmed II with only a few thousand defenders when the final siege began in April 1453. For 7 weeks, the ancient walls of Constantinople withstood Ottoman cannon fire. On May 29, 1453, the final assault broke through. Constantine XI reportedly threw off his imperial regalia and died fighting alongside his soldiers as the city fell. Mehmed rode to Hagia Sophia, which became a mosque that same day. The Roman Empire, which had endured for 1,480 years since the accession of Augustus, finally ended. The legacy of Rome, though the last emperor bearing the title of Caesar, fell with Constantinople in 1453. Rome's influence echoes through the centuries to our present day. Let us reflect on the enduring legacy of this remarkable civilization. Perhaps Rome's most significant contribution lies in the realm of law and governance. The Romans developed a sophisticated legal system that moved beyond the limited scope of earlier codes to address the complex needs of a diverse, cosmopolitan society. Concepts we take for granted, the presumption of innocence, the importance of intent in criminal acts, the distinction between civil and criminal law bear Roman fingerprints. Justinian's great legal compilation, the Corpus Juris Civilis, preserved these principles through the medieval period and into the modern era. Today, the civil law tradition that governs most of continental Europe, Latin America, and parts of Africa and Asia derives directly from Roman models. In the realm of language and literature, Rome's impact remains inescapable. Latin, the speech of rustic farmers on the Tiber's banks, became the lingua franca of Western civilization for over a millennium. Though no longer spoken as a first language, Latin's descendants, the Romance languages, including Spanish, Portuguese, French, Italian, and Romanian, are native tongues for nearly 1 billion people today. Even languages not directly descended from Latin bear its influence through centuries of borrowing. English, though Germanic in its basic structure, derives roughly 60% of its vocabulary from Latin, either directly or through French. The physical legacy of Rome remains equally impressive. Roman engineering transformed the Mediterranean landscape with an infrastructure network of unprecedented scale. Many Roman roads still form the basis of modern highways, and their carefully planned routes prove optimal even with today's technology. Roman architectural innovations, particularly their refinement of the arch, vault, and dome, made possible buildings of scale and permanence previously unimaginable. Their development of concrete allowed for structures that have endured to millennia of earthquakes, floods, and warfare. The Pantheon in Rome remains one of the world's architectural marvels. Inspiring buildings from the Renaissance to the present day, Rome's political legacy presents a more complex picture. The Republic, with its checks and balances, separation of powers, and term limits, influenced the framers of many modern constitutions, particularly America's founders. Yet, Rome also demonstrated how republican institutions could be subverted by ambitious individuals and how liberty might be traded for security and stability. The imperial system that replaced the republic similarly offered both positive and negative lessons for later generations. At its best, the Roman Empire provided good governance, security, and prosperity to diverse populations across 3 continents. At its worst, it demonstrated the dangers of autocracy and the corruption of absolute power. Christianity, the world's largest religion, owes its global spread to the Roman context in which it developed. Early Christians utilized Roman roads, ships, and urban networks to disseminate their message. After Constantine's conversion, the imperial administrative framework provided a template for ecclesiastical organization. Even the title, Pontifex Maximus, once held by Roman emperors as chief priests of the state religion, passed to the popes who lead the Catholic Church. Perhaps most fundamentally, Rome bequeathed to later civilizations a cosmopolitan vision, the idea that diverse peoples could participate in a shared cultural and political community while maintaining aspects of their distinct identities. Though imperfectly realized in practice, this Roman ideal of a world brought together under law and common citizenship rather than divided by ethnic or religious boundaries remains a powerful aspiration in our own increasingly interconnected global society. The Roman story, spanning more than 2 millennia, offers a grand epic of human achievement, resilience, and adaptation. Even after the empire ceased to exist as a political entity, its shadow continued to influence everything that followed. As you drift off to sleep, consider how different our world would be without Rome's enduring influence. Our legal systems and languages, our architecture and engineering, our political institutions and religious organizations would be profoundly transformed without the Roman experience. The same human hopes, fears, and dreams that motivated Romans for security, prosperity, meaning, and beauty motivate us still. In that shared humanity lies perhaps Rome's most profound legacy of all. The dawn of civilization, 10,000 to 3,500 BCE, long before the monumental pyramids of Egypt, the classical columns of Greece, or the efficient roads of Rome. The first civilization arose in a land defined by its hydrology. This region, whose name Mesopotamia means between the rivers in ancient Greek, was cradled between the Tigris and Euphrates. These formidable waterways flowed from the mountains of eastern Turkey to the Persian Gulf, depositing rich, fertile alluvium across the plains of what is now modern Iraq. On these fertile plains, humanity first aggregated into urban centers, developed systematic writing, codified laws, and began the sustained contemplation of the cosmos. The fundamental patterns of organized urban life emerged from this crucible. This history spans a vast arc from the 10th millennium BCE, when the first settlements appeared following the last glacial maximum, to 539 BCE, when Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered Babylon. In this period, rulers built empires of mud, brick, and bronze. Scribes pressed the indelible, wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform into clay tablets, and architects raised ziggurats to symbolically bridge the terrestrial and divine realms. Their records, preserved in humble clay, have demonstrably outlasted many far grander stone monuments. The initial chapter of civilization, encompassing the fundamental transition to sedentary life, began in the Fertile Crescent as the ice receded and humans established the foundations of organized society. Chapter 1. The Foundations of Organized Society. c. 10,000 to 3,500 BCE, as the last ice age waned, roughly corresponding to the 10th millennium BC. The climate of Southwest Asia began its profound shift towards warmer, wetter conditions. The climatic constraints that had dictated human potential for millennia gradually loosened. In the hills and valleys surrounding the twin rivers, small bands of nomadic hunter-gatherers observed a transformative ecological phenomenon: the prodigious growth of wild wheat and barley. Having spent countless generations pursuing migratory herds and gathering seasonal flora, these early peoples carried their scant possessions and moved with the rhythms of nature. Yet, in this changing environment, they began to establish prolonged residence in areas of food abundance. The earliest semi-permanent settlements were modest clusters of round huts constructed from reeds and mud, documented at sites such as Tel, Muribet, and Abu Huraira in northern Syria. Archaeological evidence from these locations substantiates the shift towards sedentary life. While still hunting gazelle and gathering wild pistachios, the inhabitants occupied the same location season after season in the Jordan Valley. One settlement achieved unprecedented scale. Jericho, arguably the world's oldest continuously inhabited town, arose approximately 11,000 years ago. Its inhabitants constructed formidable stone walls, evidence not merely of habitation, but of the earliest known communal defense and sophisticated engineering. Further east, Çatalhöyük in Anatolia developed another remarkable communal form. Here, People constructed their mud-brick dwellings in such close proximity that streets were absent. Residents accessed their homes through apertures in the roof, navigating the settlement across the rooftops like a complex. Organic structure, the true societal transformation, however, was quietly unfolding in the agricultural sphere. Through meticulous observation and selective cultivation, these nascent farmers began the process of domestication. They favored wild grains with larger seeds and husks that did not easily shatter. Over successive generations, wild grasses were transformed into cultivated wheat and barley. Concurrently, animals that were once hunted became objects of pastoralism. The fierce aurochs, the wild ancestor of modern cattle, were gradually brought into human control, followed by sheep, goats, and pigs. The domestication of animals ensured a reliable source of meat, milk, and hides, mitigating the inherent uncertainties of the hunt. This agricultural revolution diffused gradually along the fertile arc of land, the Fertile Crescent, from the Persian Gulf up through the river valleys and around to the Mediterranean coast. The transformation was not instantaneous, but a diachronic process unfolding over centuries. The implications were profound. For the first time, human communities could consistently generate a food surplus. This surplus was the necessary precondition for specialization. Individuals could now dedicate themselves to non-food production activities, leading to the emergence of potters, weavers, and toolmakers who exchanged their crafts for staple foods. During the 6th millennium BCE, another pivotal innovation appeared: pottery. While simple containers had been fabricated from stone, wood, and woven reeds for millennia, the firing of clay created vessels that were both lightweight and watertight. This development facilitated longer-term food storage and the easier transport of liquids. As crops became more productive, early farming communities encountered a distinct challenge in the lowland alluvial plains: limited rainfall. Yet, the annual flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates deposited rich silt, ideal for cultivation. These resourceful peoples began to excavate channels to direct and manage this water to their fields, the genesis of irrigation, agriculture. By the early 5th millennium BCE, small hamlets had expanded into larger agrarian settlements across the southern plain, the land that would later be called Sumer. Sites like Eridu and Uruk began as modest farming communities but would eventually grow into fundamentally new entities. True cities, the management of water became central to these developing societies, coordinating the construction and maintenance of irrigation systems required organization and leadership beyond the nuclear family unit. Communal projects to build canals and dikes fostered increasingly complex social structures. With settled agriculture came new imperative needs. Food surpluses required protection from raiders and methodical management for potential lean times. Religious beliefs evolved to address the inherent uncertainties of farming life. The forces governing rain, flood, and drought were personified as powerful deities requiring elaborate propitiation. Temples, initially simple shrines, grew more elaborate. Roughly 6,000 years ago, some communities were constructing dedicated monumental buildings where specialist surly priests performed rituals to ensure good harvests. These temples functioned not merely as centers of worship, but as redistribution centers, where grain was collected and dispensed. Consequently, social stratification intensified. Those who controlled the surpluses gained executive power. Those who interpreted the will of the gods gained religious authority. The relative egalitarianism of hunter-gatherer bands gave way to hierarchical communities with discernible emerging elites. Technological tools evolved concurrently. Copper, first used for beads and decorative items around the 7th millennium BCE, began to be shaped into practical implements. A millennium later, metal workers discovered that alloying copper with tin created bronze, a material harder and more durable than pure copper. The Bronze Age had commenced. Trade networks expanded dramatically. Highly prized obsidian from Anatolian volcanoes traveled hundreds of miles, and lapis lazuli from distant Afghanistan found its way into temple ornaments in the southern plains. By the end of the 4th millennium BCE, in the burgeoning city of Uruk, a truly momentous development occurred, driven by the escalating complexity of managing temple resources. Administrators began using clay tokens to represent quantities of goods. These tokens eventually evolved into stylized marks, pressed into clay tablets, the world's first writing system. Initially, these marks were simple pictographs drawings representing the items being counted. A drawing of an ox meant an ox. Gradually, however, the system became more abstract, transitioning to represent sounds or syllables rather than solely objects. This marked the definitive birth of true writing. By the dawn of the 4th millennium BC, the fundamental architectural components of civilization, as scholars define it, were firmly in place. Cities with thousands of inhabitants, specialized, crafts and professions, monumental, architecture, complex religious institutions, social, stratification, long-distance trade, written records. The stage was now set for the next critical phase, the emergence of the Sumerians and the world's first true urban civilization. Chapter 2. The Urban Revolution of c. 3500 to 2300 BC. The southern alluvial plain, where the twin rivers meandered toward the sea, became the heartland of humanity's first true civilization. Here, amidst marshy deltas and intensely fertile fields, a remarkable culture created an unprecedented network of true city-states, each housing thousands of inhabitants within massive mud-brick walls. Uruk, arguably the most magnificent of these early urban centers, underwent a rapid expansion after 3500 BCE. Archaeological excavations estimate that the settlement eventually covered nearly 2 hectares and may have housed up to 50,000 people at its zenith. Massive defensive walls enclosed distinct neighborhoods of densely packed houses, workshops, marketplaces, and administrative buildings. At the heart of Uruk stood its crowning achievement, the White Temple, majestically perched atop a towering platform. This structure, an early prototype of what would later develop into the classic ziggurat, stood as a testament to both sophisticated engineering prowess and profound religious devotion. Other urban centers flourished across the landscape. Ur, nestled near the ancient coastline, now far inland due to millennia of silt deposition, became a bustling port city. Eridu, which local tradition claimed to be the oldest city, housed the temple complex dedicated to Enki, the god of wisdom and fresh water. Lagash, Kish, Nippa, and Umma grew into powerful city-states, each possessing a distinct political identity, ruling dynasty, and patron deity. These cities were not simply large villages. They represented a fundamentally new form of human organization. Unlike earlier settlements, they supported a diverse array of specialists, not just farmers, but metallurgists, potters, weavers, merchants, administrators, soldiers, and priests. The development of monumental architecture permanently altered the landscape. By 3000 BCE, the city of Ur featured a temple platform exceeding 11 meters in height, necessitating the use of more than 720,000 baked bricks for its construction. The impetus behind these monumental construction projects reveals another key societal innovation: institutionalized leadership. Early governance appears to have been a form of shared authority, with councils of elders and assemblies of citizens holding significant power. However, religious leaders, who controlled the temple's vast resources, gradually assumed greater authority, evolving into priest-kings, ensi in the local tongue. These early rulers derived their legitimacy from a special mediatory relationship with the gods. In times of crisis, a temporary military leader might be appointed a lugal, literally, big man. These lugals sometimes successfully parlayed their emergency powers into permanent kingship, gradually supplanting the authority of the priests. By 2900 BCE, kingship had become firmly established in most cities of the region. Religious beliefs permeated every facet of life in these early city-states. The pantheon included countless deities, with each city elevating its patron god or goddess to special prominence. The people conceived of these gods as anthropomorphic, vastly more powerful than humans, but sharing similar emotions and needs. Temples functioned as the gods' earthly dwellings, where priests performed elaborate daily rituals of food, drink, and incense to sustain the divine residence. The cosmos was envisioned as a flat disk with the earth at its center, covered by a vault of heaven. Unlike later civilizations, there was no promise of a paradise for the virtuous. The afterlife awaited everyone as a gloomy, shadowy half-life, one of the most far-reaching innovations of this culture. Cuneiform writing continued its dramatic evolution. What began as simple pictograms for accounting gradually developed into a comprehensive writing system capable of expressing abstract concepts and recording spoken language. By 2500 BCE, scribes utilized approximately 600 different signs to write not just lists of goods, but complex letters, legal documents, medical texts, and sophisticated literature. Literacy remained the privilege of a specialized class of scribes. Young boys, primarily from wealthy families, began rigorous training in the Ida Bar tablet house, or school, around age 7. The Sumerian language, related to the later Semitic or Indo-European language families, stands as a linguistic isolate. Literature, preserved on thousands of clay tablets, reveals a rich cultural tradition. The Epic of Gilgamesh, originating in tales about a historical king of Uruk around 2700 BCE, follows its hero's poignant quest for immortality, ultimately concluding that death is humanity's inevitable fate. This civilization also created the world's oldest known law codes, though the famous Code of Hammurabi would come later. Fragments of legal texts from around 2400 BCE, such as the laws of Uranama, demonstrate a society already concerned with formalizing rules for commerce, property, and criminal justice, establishing monetary compensation for injuries rather than the principle of physical retribution. Lex talionis, economic life, revolved around the temples and palaces, which controlled vast agricultural estates. These institutions developed sophisticated accounting systems, tracking income, expenditures, loans, and interest payments. Private commerce also flourished, with merchant families conducting trade expeditions to distant lands. By the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, trade networks extended to the Indus Valley civilization in modern Pakistan, the Iranian highlands, and Anatolia, technological innovation accelerated. The potter's wheel, appearing around 3500 BCE, revolutionized ceramic production. Wheeled vehicles, first evidenced around 3200 BCE, transformed transportation and warfare. Mathematical knowledge grew sophisticated, developing a sexagesimal number system based on units of 60, whose legacy endures in our 60-minute hours and 360-degree circles. The social hierarchy grew more complex as cities expanded. At the top stood kings, priests, and nobles. Below them ranked professionals, scribes, and master craftsmen. The bulk of the population consisted of ordinary laborers, with slaves at the bottom, often a temporary status caused by debt or wartime capture. Notably, women held more rights than in many later civilizations. They could own property, operate businesses, and serve as priestesses. The city-states existed in a state of near constant competition and conflict. Disputes over water rights, boundary lines, and trade routes frequently escalated into warfare. This internal rivalry left the politically fragmented region vulnerable. By 2334 BCE, the political landscape of Mesopotamia stood poised for a massive transformation. The independent city-states, despite their sophisticated culture and technology, were about to be overshadowed by an individual who would create the world's first true empire. Chapter 3. The Akkadian Empire c. 233–42154 BCE. To the north of the ancient city-states of Sumer, another culture had been developing in the central plains of Mesopotamia. These people spoke a Semitic language distinct from the linguistic isolate of their southern neighbors. Though influenced by the achievements of the Sumerians, they maintained their own identity, centered around their main settlement, Ithaca, whose exact location remains unknown to modern archaeologists, but was likely near present-day Baghdad. From this city would emerge a figure whose ambition redefined the political landscape of the ancient world. Sargon, whose name means the true king in his native Akkadian language. The origins of Sargon are shrouded in legend. Later, tradition claimed he was a foundling set adrift on the Euphrates, akin to the biblical Moses. Whatever his true background, Sargon began his career as a cupbearer to the king of Kish. Around 2334 BC, he seized power in Kish and swiftly turned his attention southward toward the wealthy cities of the Sumerian plain. Sargon's chief rival was Lugalzijsi, the ruler from Uruk, who had briefly united many southern cities. The clash represented a confrontation between two distinct models of state organization. Lugalzijsi sought to maintain the traditional system of paramount city-states, while Sargon envisioned a revolutionary, unified territorial state under direct central control. In a series of decisive military campaigns, Sargon defeated Lugalzijsi and the allied forces of the southern cities. The victorious northern ruler then instituted a radical new approach to governance. Instead of allowing conquered cities to maintain autonomy under local dynasties who paid tribute, he removed their rulers and installed loyal officials, often members of his own family, as governors. This administrative innovation marked the definitive birth of the world's first true empire, a multi-ethnic state with centralized authority extending over a vast territory at its height. The Akkadian Empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea. To bind this diverse realm together, Sargon implemented several unifying strategies. He established his native Akkadian language as the official imperial language for administration. He standardized weights and measures to facilitate taxation and trade. he created a standing professional army, reportedly numbering 5,400 men, who were loyal to the ruler rather than to local cities. Sargon ruled for approximately 56 years, providing the stability necessary for imperial institutions to take root. His successors faced the constant challenge of maintaining control over diverse territories. Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson, proved to be the most capable ruler after the founder. He crushed a massive rebellion of several major cities, demonstrating military skill and ruthlessness. After these victories, Naram-Sin took an unprecedented step. He declared himself a god. Previous rulers had claimed divine appointment, but Naram-Sin had his name written with the divine determinative in cuneiform. Official art depicted him wearing the horned crown traditionally reserved for deities. This elevation of the ruler to divine status reflected both the extraordinary power of the imperial office and, perhaps, a strategy to strengthen loyalty in a multi-ethnic realm. Naram-Sin's famous victory steelly depicts him as a heroic figure, physically larger than his soldiers and trampling defeated enemies. Despite these impressive achievements, the imperial edifice began to crack. Maintaining control over such vast territories was increasingly difficult. Provincial governors developed their own power bases, and the costs of constant military campaigns strained the economy. External pressure intensified, particularly from the mountain peoples known as the Guti, who raided from the Zagros Mountains after the death of Naram-Sin. His son, Shaka-Lishari, inherited these mounting problems. Though capable, the centrifugal forces pulling at the empire proved too strong. Provincial areas broke away, external enemies pressed in, and economic troubles deepened. This period of confusion lasted until approximately 2154 BC, when the last nominal ruler of the dynasty was overthrown, bringing the Akkadian Empire to its end. The cultural impact of this first empire fundamentally outlasted its political structures. The fusion of northern Semitic and southern Sumerian traditions created a blended Mesopotamian culture that would influence the region for centuries. Crucially, the imperial ideal, a unified territorial state under a single ruler, became a recurring aspiration for ambitious leaders, providing the blueprint for future empires across the ancient world. Chapter 4. The Neo-Sumerian Revival, c. 2112 a 2004 BC. Following the collapse of the world's first empire, a period of fragmentation ensued across the lands between the rivers. The mountain-dwelling Guti seized control of northern territories, while southern city-states regained independence under local leaders. This interlude of disunity lasted for nearly a century. The Guti, described in contemporary texts as the dragon of the mountains, maintained loose control over the north, but never established sophisticated administrative structures, relying instead on raids and tribute collection. Meanwhile, in the south, a remarkable cultural renaissance began taking shape. Freed from northern control, yet drawing on the integrated traditions developed during the Akkadian era, the ancient cities experienced a creative rebirth. Scholars call this phase the Neo-Sumerian period, marked by the revitalization of older cultural forms within new political structures. Among these resurgent southern centers, the city of Lagash achieved particular prominence under a ruler named Gudea. Though he never attempted to build a large territorial state, Gudea presided over a flourishing of arts, architecture, and religious expression. Dozens of statues depicting this pious leader have survived, showing him in poses of devotion. Crafted from hard diorite stone imported through extensive trade networks, Gudia's inscriptions detail elaborate temple construction, projects, and his profound religious piety, while Lagash flourished culturally. A different city soon emerged as the political center of a renewed territorial state. Ur, an ancient settlement near the Persian Gulf, became the seat of a new dynasty founded by a ruler named Urnama around 2112 BCE. This capable leader successfully drove out the Guti from the north and reunited much of the former imperial territory. Though on a somewhat smaller scale, unlike the previous empire builders, who emphasized military conquest and centralization through force, Urnama established his reputation primarily as a lawgiver and builder. Thus, the law code bearing his name, though only partially preserved, stands as the earliest known systematic legal collection in history, predating the more famous Code of Hammurabi by more than 3 centuries. This pioneering legal text established fixed monetary penalties for various offenses, moving away from physical retribution towards standardized compensation. It notably protected the less powerful widows, orphans, and the poor from exploitation by the wealthy. Beyond his legal innovations, Urnama embarked on an ambitious building program throughout his domains. His most visible achievement was the construction of monumental ziggurats, massive, step-sided temple structures that rose dramatically toward the heavens. Chapter 4: The Neo-Sumerian Revival Cant. The best preserved example of this monumental architecture, Ur featured 3 distinct stepped levels, reaching an estimated height of approximately equals 30 meters, and was accessed by triple staircases. These imposing structures, visible for miles across the alluvial plain, served as potent symbols of renewed cultural confidence and religious dedication. The sophisticated administrative system developed during this period represented a highly effective blend of centralized state control and regional governance. Provincial governors (ensi) oversaw local affairs, while a complex bureaucracy managed the state's extensive collection and redistribution of resources. Royal officials conducted systematic tours of inspection, and messengers utilized designated routes between administrative centers, ensuring efficient communication across the realm. Under Urnama's son, Shulgi, who reigned for an extraordinary 48 years, the state reached its organizational and economic zenith. This long-reigning monarch implemented numerous institutional innovations that solidified central governance while pragmatically respecting local traditions. He established a standardized calendar, reformed weights and measures, created a royal messenger system with fixed posting stations, reorganized the tax system, and standardized scribal education. Shulgi also meticulously cultivated his image as an ideal ruler through symbolic acts, notably claiming to be a champion runner who personally carried ritual offerings between major temple cities, emphasizing his unifying role through personal exertion and divine favor. In the later years of his reign, Shulgi followed the precedent established by the Akkadians and declared himself divine, a move intended to create a powerful religious foundation for political unity across traditionally independent city-states. The economic system of this era combined centralized planning with market elements. The state controlled vast agricultural estates, directly employing thousands of laborers, and managed extensive redistribution networks. Concurrently, private merchants conducted independent trade ventures, typically under royal oversight. Culturally, the era saw a profound revival of the ancient Sumerian language for religious and literary composition. Scribal schools flourished, preserving and standardizing traditional texts. An innovative literary form that emerged was the royal love song, lyrical compositions depicting romantic relationships between the king and the goddess Inanna. These poems, which skillfully fused politics with eroticism, served to reinforce the theological underpinnings of royal authority through divine marriage metaphors. The stability of this Renaissance period began its inevitable erosion under Shulgi's successors. Ibbisin, the last ruler of the dynasty, faced mounting challenges. Provincial governors increasingly asserted de facto autonomy, withholding tax revenues and declaring outright independence. Nomadic Amorite groups infiltrated from the west. Most critically, the ancient irrigation systems faced a combination of drought conditions and the cumulative effects of salinization, a process where repeated irrigation in an arid climate leads to salt accumulation in the soil, catastrophically reducing fertility. Grain prices recorded in contemporary texts indicate dramatic inflation, suggesting severe agricultural collapse. The final blow came from the neighboring state of Elam, centered in modern southwestern Iran. Around 2004 BCE, Elamite forces, allied with other enemies, captured Ur itself. The city was pillaged, its ziggurat desecrated, and Ibbisin was taken captive to Elam, marking the fall of the Ur III dynasty. A contemporary lament poetically described the destruction as a divine punishment for human failings. Though politically devastating, the collapse did not erase the cultural achievements of the Neo-Sumerian Renaissance. Its legal concepts, administrative techniques, and architectural forms continued to shape Mesopotamian civilization for centuries, setting the stage for new political configurations. Chapter 5. The Old Babylonian Empire c. 1894 to 1595 BCE. After the demise of the Ur III dynasty, political power in Mesopotamia fragmented among numerous competing city-states. This period of division, lasting nearly a century, saw the emergence of regional powers such as Isin, Larsa, Ish, and Mari. A significant demographic shift accompanied this fragmentation. Semi-nomadic peoples, speaking a West Semitic language, established ruling dynasties in several key cities. One such Amorite leader, established himself in a previously minor settlement called Babylon around 1894 BCE, located strategically on the Euphrates River. This city, whose name meant Gate of the Gods, was initially unremarkable. However, it would gradually rise to unprecedented prominence. For its first century under Amorite leadership, Babylon remained a minor regional power. The geopolitical situation shifted dramatically with the accession of the sixth ruler of the dynasty, Hammurabi, in 1792 BCE. This monarch would rule for 43 years, establishing Babylon as the dominant center of Mesopotamian civilization through military prowess, administrative genius, and meticulous image building. Early in his reign, Hammurabi focused on internal development, reinforcing infrastructure, and cultivating relationships with neighbors. Around the middle of his reign, having consolidated his base, he embarked on a series of military campaigns that systematically eliminated rival centers of power, Larsa, Ishnana, Mari, and even Ashur, uniting virtually all of Mesopotamia under a single rule for the first time since the Akkadian Empire. Unlike earlier conquerors, Hammurabi presented himself as a conservative restorer of ancient traditions. His royal inscriptions depicted him as a shepherd appointed by the gods to bring justice to the land. This emphasis culminated in the Code of Hammurabi, inscribed on a 2.25-meter-tall stone stele, containing 282 legal provisions. The code revealed a complex, class-based society. Penalties varied based on the social status, aristocrat, commoner, or slave of the parties involved. While the principle of lex talionis, an eye for an eye, applied between equals, the code repeatedly emphasized protection for the vulnerable to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak. Hammurabi was equally active as an administrator and economic manager. His government maintained detailed records of production and resource distribution. Surviving letters reveal his hands-on approach to governance, personally addressing complaints and micromanaging projects. In religious matters, he elevated Babylon's patron deity to a position of prominence in the regional pantheon, symbolically mirroring Babylon's new political supremacy. When Hammurabi died around 1750 BC, his unified kingdom soon began to fracture. Revolts erupted in southern cities, and external threats, the Sealand dynasty in the extreme south and mountain peoples from the Zagros range gradually eroded central control. By 1700 BCE, much of the south was lost, though Babylon itself remained prosperous and culturally dominant. Babylonian culture during this period synthesized older traditions, and the Akkadian language of Babylon became the international diplomatic lingua franca of the Near East. Intellectual achievement flourished, particularly in astronomy and mathematics. Babylonian scholars developed the first predictive mathematical models of planetary behavior and worked with an advanced sexagesimal numeral system that allowed for complex calculations, including solving quadratic equations. The end of the dynasty came suddenly in 1595 BCE. The Hittites, an Indo-European-speaking people based in central Anatolia, launched a long-distance raid of unprecedented scale under King Murzili I. The Babylonians were utterly unprepared. The Hittites breached the city's defenses, plundered its treasures, and overthrew the ruling dynasty, though they quickly withdrew to their homeland. Into the resulting power vacuum stepped another group, the Kassites. Chapter 6. Kassite Rule and Regional Powers, c. 1595 to 1155 BCE, following the catastrophic Hittite raid. A new group, the Kassites, assumed control of Babylon. Originally mountain dwellers from the Zagros, the Kassites had gradually integrated into Mesopotamian society. Seizing the opportunity, a Kassite leader claimed the throne, establishing a dynasty that would rule for centuries, marking a period of remarkable stability and cultural continuity. Unlike previous conquerors, the Kassites fully embraced the cultural and religious traditions of Babylon. They adopted the titles, gods, and administrative practices of their predecessors. The political landscape of the Near East had transformed into what historians term the Club of Great Powers, a system of balanced rivalries and alliances that included Kassite, Babylon, the New Kingdom of Egypt, the Hittite Empire, and the Mitanni Kingdom. International relations were governed by established diplomatic protocols, with royal letters, Amarna letters being a key archive, written in Akkadian, cementing its role as the diplomatic language of the era. Kassite monarchs ruled through an administrative system that featured distinctive innovations in land management. They granted large estates to loyal supporters, documenting these awards on Kudaru stones, boundary markers, which served as official legal records and feudal grants. Intellectual achievements were significant, particularly in the systematic organization of knowledge and astronomical observation. Scribal schools compiled comprehensive lists, surly attempts at encyclopedic organization, covering everything from divine names to legal precedents. Astronomical tracking of celestial movements became increasingly precise. initially driven by divinatory purposes, but accumulating datasets that would eventually enable mathematical prediction. The zodiacal system began taking recognizable form during this era. The stability of the Kassite regime eventually succumbed to external pressures. The balance of power began unraveling around 1200 BCI, a period known as the Bronze Age collapse, when a series of dramatic upheavals devastated the Near East. The Kassite kingdom initially proved resilient. It was fatally weakened by increasingly destructive raids from Elamite forces from southwestern Iran. The Elamite king, Shutruknahunt, led a devastating campaign around 1160 BCE, capturing important cities and carrying off cultural treasures, including the stele of Naram-Sin and the Code of Hammurabi. This Elamite invasion fatally weakened Kassite control, allowing a native Babylonian dynasty, the Second Dynasty of Isin, to seize power around 1155 BCE, ending for centuries of Kassite rule. Despite the political transition, the Kassite period left an enduring legacy of cultural development and a systematic organization that provided a resilient framework for Babylonian civilization to survive the ensuing Iron Age. Transformations, Chapter 7, The Assyrian Empire, c. 1300 to 609 BCE. While Babylon enjoyed centuries of relative stability under Kassite rule, a formidable power was developing in the northern reaches of Mesopotamia. In the land watered by the upper Tigris, the Assyrians crafted a society defined by military prowess, administrative efficiency, and ruthless determination. Originally a trading city-state centered around Ashur, their experience as middlemen gave them broad knowledge that later served their imperial ambitions. The transition to an expansionist power began gradually during the 14th century BCE. Early rulers, like Ashur-uballit, IC 1363 to 1328 BCE, asserted independence and began intervening in regional politics. Military expansion accelerated under subsequent rulers, extending territorial control and establishing provinces. While other regional powers collapsed during the Bronze Age disruptions around 1200 BCE, Assyria weathered the storm. The true turning point came during the reign of Tiglath-Pileser, IC 1114 to 1076 BCE, an energetic ruler who conducted campaigns in all directions, reaching the Mediterranean coast. His inscriptions established the twin motifs that would characterize Assyrian kingship, warrior, and hunter. The foundations for extraordinary imperial expansion were laid during the 9th century BCE. Driven by rulers like Ashurnasirpal, 2883 to 859 BC, he established a new capital at Kalku, modern Nimrod, and constructed a magnificent palace decorated with stone reliefs that served as powerful propaganda, visually narrating military conquests and royal hunts. Military innovations transformed the Assyrian army into an unstoppable force. Iron weapons, specialized units, charioteers, cavalry, archers, and siege engineers, and meticulous logistics provided a technological and organizational advantage. Administrative systems matched this military sophistication. Conquered territories were organized into provinces, and a network of roads, way stations, and messenger systems facilitated rapid communication. Perhaps most notorious was the calculated use of terror as a political tool. Royal inscriptions and palace reliefs explicitly depicted extreme punishments, flying, impalement, and mass executions intended to discourage resistance. The policy of mass deportation moved conquered populations throughout the empire to disrupt local identities and prevent future uprisings. The empire expanded dramatically under Tiglath-Pileser III, 745 to 727 BCE, a usurper who implemented sweeping administrative and military reforms. Under him and his successors, notably Sargon to Sennacherib and Esarhaddon, the empire reached unprecedented size, eventually encompassing most of the Middle East, from western Iran to central Egypt. This vast territory incorporated diverse environments and populations, presenting enormous administrative challenges that the Assyrians attempted to manage with ruthless efficiency. The geopolitics of empire, Assyria and Babylon. The relationship between Assyria and Babylon critically illustrates the evolution of imperial strategy. Early Assyrian monarchs treated Babylon with calculated deference due to its ancient cultural and religious prestige. Tiglath-Pileser III took the traditional approach of being crowned separately as king of Babylon under a distinct throne, name a practice maintained by his successor, Shalmaneser V. When Sennacherib grew frustrated with repeated Babylonian rebellions, often supported by Elam, he adopted a radical reversal of policy. In 689 BCE, he ordered the complete destruction of Babylon, demolishing temples, destroying irrigation systems, and carrying the sacred statue of Marduk off to Assyria as a hostage. This unprecedented sacrilege, however, proved counterproductive, generating religious horror both regionally and within Assyria itself. Sennacherib's assassination in 681 BCE was widely interpreted as divine punishment for this act. His son, Esarhaddon, immediately reversed this policy, ordering the full reconstruction of Babylon as a primary royal act. This pragmatic ruler recognized that ideological alignment and religious respect were more effective tools of control than brutality. Esarhaddon successfully maintained distinct cultural identities for Assyria and Babylonia while holding both under unified control, and in 671 BCE he achieved the conquest of Egypt, extending the Assyrian Empire to its greatest territorial extent. The final major Assyrian ruler, Ashurbanipal, 668 to 627 BC, presided over the empire's cultural and territorial peak. Notably, he boasted of his literacy and scholarly abilities. Under his patronage, the library at Nineveh was established, collecting 30,000 clay tablets encompassing literary, religious, and scientific works, an invaluable collection preserved ironically by the very destruction that soon engulfed the empire. Collapse of the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Despite outward appearances of invincibility, the massive empire faced mounting structural problems. Controlling vast territory required immense resources, and constant warfare strained manpower and economic sustainability. Subject populations harbored deep resentment toward Assyrian rule. Ashurbanipal's death around 627 BCE exposed the empire's fragility. Succession disputes weakened central authority, coinciding with mounting external threats. Babylon, under a Chaldean dynasty led by Nabopolassar, declared independence in 626 BCE. Crucially, Nabopolassar formed an alliance with the Medes, a powerful Iranian kingdom. This Babylonian-Median alliance launched a direct assault on the Assyrian heartland. Ashur fell in 614 BCE, followed by the decisive capture and sacking of Nineveh in 612 BCE. By 609 BCE, Assyrian independence was completely extinguished. The fall of Assyria was as dramatic as its rise. The capital cities were swiftly reduced to overgrown mounds. The deep hatred engendered by Assyrian imperial practices was reflected in contemporary prophetic descriptions of Nineveh's fall. Nevertheless, Assyria left an enduring legacy. Its imperial systems of governance, road networks, and through the preservation of texts, its cultural and literary archives provided models for subsequent empires. Chapter 8. The Neo-Babylonian Empire, 162-6539 BC. From the ashes of Assyrian domination arose a revitalized Babylonian state, creating a final, magnificent chapter in Mesopotamian civilization, the Neo-Babylonian or Chaldean Empire. Its foundation was laid by who consolidated control over the south and through the alliance with the Medes, led the campaign that destroyed Assyria. His son, Nebuchadnezzar II, became the defining figure of this era, ruling for 43 years 605 to 562 BCE. He secured the western territories of the former Assyrian Empire, extending Babylonian control through Syria and Palestine. His fateful siege of Jerusalem in 587 BCE resulted in the destruction of the Hebrew temple and the exile of the Judean elite to Babylon, a pivotal event in Jewish history. Having secured his borders, Nebuchadnezzar devoted vast resources to monumental construction that transformed Babylon into the largest and most magnificent city of the ancient world. Massive new walls encircled an urban expanse of over 850 hectares. The city featured wide processional ways paved with limestone and decorated with glazed brick reliefs of lions and dragons. Most spectacular was the temple complex dedicated to Marduk, featuring the colossal ziggurat, likely the inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel, the royal palace complex, which Greek tradition claims included the famous, though archaeologically elusive, Hanging Gardens. One of the seven wonders of the ancient world, matched the temples in grandeur. Intellectually, the Neo-Babylonian period saw significant advancements, particularly in astronomy. Court scholars refined observational and mathematical techniques for predicting celestial events, primarily for religious purposes, omens, but establishing a foundation for later scientific astronomy. Nebuchadnezzar's death in 562 BCE revealed a critical weakness: the absence of stable institutional structures for succession. After a series of short reigns, Nabonidus assumed the throne. Nabonidus generated increasing internal opposition due to his singular devotion to the moon god Sin, which alienated the powerful priesthood of Marduk. More controversially, he spent 10 years of his 17-year reign in the Arabian oasis of Tama, leaving his son Belshazzar as regent in Babylon. Chapter 9. The Persian Conquest, 539 BCE. Meanwhile, a new power was rising to the east. The Persians, led by Cyrus II the Great, having overthrown their former Median overlords. Cyrus had rapidly consolidated control over the Iranian plateau and Western Asia. His imperial strategy was characterized by a revolutionary policy of cultural and religious tolerance, allowing conquered peoples to retain their customs and religious practices, focusing instead on ensuring loyalty and tribute. As Persian forces approached Babylonian territory in 539 BC, they encountered a deeply divided society. Persian forces under General Gobryas conducted a brilliant maneuver, diverting river waters to enter Babylon beneath its massive walls. The Nabonidus Chronicle, a contemporary text, records the city's fall as occurring without battle. Cyrus entered the city not as a destroyer, but as a respectful liberator. His famous Cyrus cylinder inscription portrays him as chosen by Marduk to restore proper worship and governance. Most significantly, Cyrus's policy allowed displaced peoples, including the Jewish exiles, to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples, a decree that established him as a divine agent in Jewish tradition. The Persian conquest marked the end of independent Mesopotamian political systems. Babylon became a wealthy province within the larger Achaemenid Empire, which established a new paradigm of multicultural governance. The empire was divided into provinces, satrapies, utilized Aramaic as an administrative language, and maintained a policy of religious tolerance. The Achaemenid dynasty ruled Mesopotamia until 331 BCE, when Alexander the Great defeated the last Persian king. Chapter 10: The Twilight of Mesopotamia, 539 BCE to 600 CE. The Persian conquest marked the beginning of a long decline for the ancient civilization. Though cities endured, the distinctive indigenous culture gradually transformed under foreign rule. The Persian period, 539 to 331 BCE, was marked by respect for Babylonian traditions. The more dramatic shift came with the arrival of Alexander the Great in 331 BCE. His death in Babylon in 323 BCE led to the city falling under the control of his general, Seleucus, who established the Seleucid Empire, rather than ruling from Babylon. Seleucus founded a new capital, Seleucia, on the Tigris, which became a Greek-style polis. This development initiated a slow decline in Babylon's population as residents migrated to the new city. Under Seleucid rule, a complex Greco-Mesopotamian cultural synthesis emerged. Greek became the administrative language, but traditional cuneiform writing persisted for religious and astronomical texts. Babylonian astronomical knowledge, with its sophisticated mathematical basis, significantly influenced Greek theoretical models of the cosmos. Political control shifted again around 141 BCE when the Parthians, an Iranian people, seized Mesopotamia. This marked a partial return to Eastern cultural patterns. The Parthian period saw the final phase of cuneiform writing. The latest known cuneiform astronomical text dates to 75 CE, signaling a decisive break in cultural continuity. During this time, the Jewish community in Babylon flourished, laying the groundwork for what would become the Babylonian Talmud. The final major imperial transition occurred when the Sasanian Persians overthrew Parthian rule in 224 CE, establishing a more centralized Iranian state. Under Sasanian governance, 224-651 CE, Zoroastrianism received strong state support, and Ctesiphon, near Seleucia, flourished as the region's primary city. The legacy of the Neo-Babylonian Renaissance and the subsequent imperial periods, however, ensured that Mesopotamian intellectual and cultural achievements, from astronomy to legal concepts, were preserved and transmitted to the emerging civilizations of the West and the Islamic world. Chapter 10: The Twilight and Enduring Legacy, 539 BC, present. The period following the Persian conquest initiated a prolonged twilight for the distinct Mesopotamian civilization. The cultural landscape during these final centuries of pre-Islamic Mesopotamia was characterized by extraordinary religious syncretism and diversity. Jewish scholarly communities produced the Babylonian Talmud, completed approximately equals 500 CE, the foundational legal and ethical compilation of Rabbinic Judaism. Simultaneously, Eastern Christianity, the Church of the East, developed sophisticated theological traditions and expansive missionary networks, while Manichaeans and Manichaean missionaries contributed to the theological ferment. However, within dwindling temples, The last priests maintaining ancient Mesopotamian religious practices continued their increasingly isolated rites, their numbers diminishing with each generation. This complex religious structure was decisively transformed by the Arab-Islamic conquests of the 630s and 640s, after the decisive Battle of Odyssey in 636 Arab armies gained control of Mesopotamia, which would become the heartland of the Abbasid Caliphate after Baghdad was founded in 762 CE. This new imperial center was constructed just 30 kilometers from the ruins of previous capitals, continuing a pattern of successive urban rebirth under Islamic rule. The region, now increasingly called Iraq, experienced a cultural revitalization, albeit within an entirely different religious and linguistic tradition. The ancient gods, cuneiform script, and ziggurats were largely superseded, yet subtle continuities persisted. Astronomical and mathematical knowledge, refined over millennia, influenced early Islamic science. Irrigation techniques sustained agriculture, and administrative practices informed Islamic governance. The final disappearance of recognizably Mesopotamian cultural traditions cannot be precisely dated. Rather, the civilization gradually diffused its influence, transitioning from direct cultural continuity to indirect legacy. Epilogue: the legacy of Mesopotamia. Modern archaeological excavations, beginning in the 19th century, revealed the forgotten splendor of ancient Mesopotamia, transforming humanity's understanding of its own origins. The enduring legacy of the land between the rivers is profound, resting upon foundational concepts that shaped all subsequent civilizations. Writing: the systematic development of cuneiform c. 3400 BCE established the concept of written communication, the most revolutionary technology in human history for record-keeping, literature, and law. Urban organization. The early cities of Sumer pioneered the organization of complex urban communities, grappling with problems of governance, resource management, and social hierarchy that remain familiar today. Mathematics and astronomy. The sexagesimal system, basic, which continues to define our measurement of time, 60 seconds, minutes, and angular geometry, approximately equals 360 in a circle, originated with Sumerian scribes. Legal concepts. Early law codes, for example. Yonama Hammurabi established the principle that law should be publicly known, consistently applied, and derived from established authority, a concept underlying all modern legal systems. Religious and mythological frameworks. Narratives like the Epic of Gilgamesh and concepts of divine justice and cosmic order influenced subsequent theological thinking throughout the Middle East, for example. The flood narrative. Technological innovations. Advances such as systematic irrigation, the potter's wheel, metallurgy, and wheeled vehicles fundamentally transformed economic possibilities. The story of Mesopotamia reflects the fundamental nature of civilization, an ongoing flow of influence and adaptation. Its achievements were not isolated events, but the first sustained expression of humanity's capacity for cumulative cultural achievement, setting precedents in statecraft, literature, and scientific inquiry that continue to resonate in our modern world.